Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 139 of ThROH The Years, the podcast reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. My name is Trevor Dame, joined as always by the co-host of the show, Matt Feuerstein. Matt, I almost screwed up the intro, which happens way too often. I'm going to blame being discombobulated on the fact this is a very rare for us Tuesday night record. We normally record Saturday, Friday, Sunday. Those are usually the 3 days. Didn't realize it hasn't been a bad thing, but the amount of times today I felt just weird, not in a bad way, but we're recording on a Tuesday. When I look out the window after the show, will the moon still be up there? It is upsetting my sensitive, rigid personal schedule of life where I expect everything. What's next, Matt? Breakfast for dinner? This is crazy. This is crazy stuff.
Well, you're breaking kayfabe because in canon we are always live whenever you happen to be listening. That's how this podcast is supposed to work. It's a Tuesday. I know that you have a very rigid Tuesday routine, which is that you play mahjong every night with a bunch of older ladies every Tuesday night. But it's canceled this week anyway because tomorrow is Lunar New Year. So you're not going to be playing mahjong tonight anyway. So I feel like why not just record?
The sad thing is, Matt, you say that as a joke. It's not as far from a joke as you might think, because one of my weird things I decided to try and do for the new year, I tried to learn a new language that lasted a week. I tried, and I've been trying to teach myself to play bridge. And so the chances that I might have a future engagement with a bunch of old women, it draws ever closer, Matt. It draws ever closer.
There you go. I said mahjong because that's what my grandmother and mother play. This is a thing that Jewish ladies like to do as well. I don't know when that was adopted, but it has been. So that was on the top of my mind, and also I still think that that's what you do every Tuesday night. So,
well, it's like they say, Matt. Bridge is the gateway to mahjong.
So wait, no. Now I need to know what's a typical Tuesday, Trevor.
Well, here's the thing. A bunch of years ago, I tried to start eating healthier and just lose some weight, and I did, and I've been maintaining that for years now. And what the thing I do that I find that works well is I eat really strictly healthy broccoli, sprouts, all that fun stuff, limited calories, Thursday through Sunday, and Monday through Wednesday, I basically eat what I want. So basically Monday through Wednesday is me kind of in a sugar-induced coma that I then have to burn off for the rest of the week. So Tuesday
tradition is shoving your face into a giant cake of some kind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Matt, I actually have a slice of cake in the refrigerator I will be eating after the show. So you are continually, so far early on in this episode, getting way too close to my actual life.
And we're not even breaking your tradition. So there we go. It's perfect. Tuesday records from now on. No, just kidding.
That's what I would love about I would love if the ROH Tradition Continues episode of that show, the show that was called Tradition Continues, was just about eating cake. But
sounds good.
We got a huge show today, too big, one of the bigger shows we've covered in quite some time, too big to talk about, just spend our time yapping about eating cake. We only have one bit of news to talk about that's not related to the show, although it kind of is related to the show that we're going to cover tonight, because it is something they have hyped for the last two shows, and they hype is happening during this show, although I don't know if that was technically true, which was the fact that the Ring of Honor World title on this weekend, the reason why Morishima couldn't defend on the show we're covering tonight, is because he was in Noah defending the Ring of Honor World title in Noah's Budokan Hall show in the main event against Kenta. And Ring of Honor's been hyping this for the last 2 or 3 shows on DVD, this is going to be the biggest crowd Ring of Honor's world title's ever been defended in front of. It's main eventing the Budokan Hall, the storied hall of Japan. So many classic shows have happened there, all Japan shows. and it's going to be 13,500 people, huge crowd. And we'll read Dave Meltzer's story on The Observer about this show from his Noah section of The Observer, because it's one of those classic examples, much like If Anyone Ever Dates Me, Matt, sometimes someone's lowest point can be someone else's highest point. So this is from Dave's Noah section. Dave wrote at the time, Pro Wrestling Noah had been the last vestige of old-school Japanese pro wrestling that could at least draw for big events. The reasons were that, by and large, the group's main events delivered and its big stars were protected as big stars in booking. A key factor in building the promotion was also the 2-year reign of Kento Kobashi as GHC champion. As it turned out, as Kobashi was Wrestler of the Year for all those years, due to having a bad time slot, they created no new mainstream stars. So, in case you're wondering what Dave's referring to back there, over the years, All Japan Noah's their TV time slot, it got put way late in the night, and so there was some thought, would this hurt it down the line, because TV exposure typically drives wrestling. So anyway, going back to Dave wrote, quite frankly, it may be impossible for Noah or any Japanese group to truly do so today because of the lack of visibility of the product. Most of the final generation of stars who headlined before wrestling became 2 a.m. television fare, which is not an exaggeration, are on their last legs. Even if Kobashi hadn't have contracted cancer, I think Dave could have written that better, which he is still battling, physically he was unlikely to be able to continue to work at his prior level for much longer. Similar to Kaiji Muto, who had one last great run and really hasn't been able to do much since because of shot knees. As noted, the inability to sell tickets with Naomichi Marufuji as GHC champion for the Budokan Hall shows made them change the planned direction and go with Mitsuharu Misawa, the company's established superstar. Misawa against the company's best young heavyweight, Takeshi Morishima, drew 12,000 to Budokan Hall, but on March 4th, the decision was made to go with Misawa versus Takashi Sugiura as part of a 5-singles match main event deal. As much as Sugiura is respected for being a hard worker, it wasn't a marquee match and sales were bad. With what we were told was significant papering, an empty building when the show started grew to about 9,000 fans. They announced 13,500 to save face. It was the smallest crowd the company has ever done in its big show home building, and given the lineup, that wasn't a surprise. What was deep in terms of 5 singles main events, Misawa vs. Sugiura is not a Budokan Hall main event. The gimmick was the order of the last 5 matches would be determined by a fan internet voting, but the results wouldn't be announced until the participants' matches started. Morishima vs. Kenta for the ROH title ended up winning the balloting, so they headlined. It was by far the largest stage the ROH title has ever played before. Instead of doing the usual 20-minute Budokan title match main event, they did a fast-paced and what was called a very good match in just 9 minutes 44 seconds with Morishima retaining. So yeah, I mean, on this DVD, they talk about, Morishima's main eventing right now. He just won in Budokan Hall against 13,500 people. It was actually 9,000. It was, again, it was simultaneously 2 things could be true. It was by a metric shit ton the largest crowd that had ever seen a Ring of Honor World Title match at 9,000 people, and also the worst crowd for a Budokan Hall show Noah had ever drawn in its short history. So it is funny when 2 ships kind of pass upwards and downwards at the same time.
Now that would not be a bad number at all for current Noah, right?
No. I mean, we talked about this a few shows ago where I think on Morishima's debut Ring of Honor show, this was a time where Noah was starting to decline in some ways, and they were on this constant search to find who can replace Misawa and Kobashi as our big heavyweight draw, and Morishima was one of the names they were building up, but they run through a bunch of guys: Go Shiozaki, Marufuji, Kenta, Sugiura, and they spoiler, they do not find that guy that can replace Misawa or Kobashi on top. I will say there is something hopeful about Dave writing, and Dave was not the only one feeling this way about, like, you hear a little bit in that article about Dave's tone about, like, how almost a sense that Japanese wrestling is doomed to be more marginalized and not get successful again. It is a nice reminder that things can look really bleak for a company or a wrestling scene. And then, New Japan comes along a few years later and starts its rise and becomes, I think a lot of people at this time would have never predicted that any Japanese company would have risen back to those heights again.
Now, I'm curious because you seem to know more about like the TV situation there. Were all the major promotions kind of dumped late at night at this point? And did that change when New Japan started to become popular? Did it change before New Japan started to become popular? Like, because obviously maybe TV plays a different role now than it used to, but we know that in U.S. wrestling, TV still matters, and the platform matters a lot. So that was interesting to hear you talk about that. Do you even know? I'm not sure. I don't want to put you on
Yeah,
the spot.
I do know some stuff, but my knowledge, the limits of my knowledge are being exposed here. But I do remember it being shifted to a late night time slot. Caused a lot of consternation back then. I will say that without remembering exactly what happened with the TV with New Japan, I imagine while TV is still a big driver for wrestling, every year that goes by, I think the internet helps a bit with getting your stuff out there, obviously. And they have New Japan World and stuff like that now, where maybe it's a little less life or death than it used to be. Although I still think TV is a big driver, but we are seeing, WWE putting one of its flagship tentpole TV shows now under, off TV onto something that's paywalled where you have to have the internet and you have to pay to see it in a way beyond just having a basic cable subscription. So, maybe we are probably going to get to an age in our lifetimes, Matt, if we live long enough, where television does not matter to the degree that it has for our entire lifetimes, where TV has always been like the engine of pro wrestling, where you get the exposure on TV and that drives all your other revenue streams, or in case of the last 10, 20 years, it becomes your main revenue stream.
Yeah, I mean, well, we're already in an era where people my age and younger, most of the people that I know in that generation don't have a traditional TV hookup. They have television sets, a lot of them, and they have streaming services. And obviously, this is not news to anybody listening to this. But so I think when you say in our lifetimes, I think like real soon that's going to happen.
I think, well, the only thing that I hold a slight bit of thought of is I wonder if there'll ever be a backlash, because one of the big selling points of everything going internet was to streaming platforms was it was cheaper and easier. You didn't have to be forced into buying these big bundles of TV channels the way a lot of cable companies do. And now the streaming platforms have gotten so scattered and competitive, and there's a little bit of what you want to watch on 14 different platforms, that the idea of just paying like $100 to the cable company and getting a package that has everything you want is, at some points now when I'm looking at all the streaming things that I kind of want to watch a little of, it almost now seems like the more convenient economic thing at this point.
Yeah, well, I could see I could see something that kind of is like a kind of like a simulacrum of what cable was, which is a bundle of streaming services. But I still don't think it's going to be what we think of as like cable TV now, where you're like flipping through channels and there's like a million of them, and it's not on demand. I just don't see that, because like, just as it is, these cable channels don't have any programming anymore. Like I was, every week when the ratings come out, they talk about a show's rank on the weekly ratings. Dave Meltzer will be like, AEW, finished first among entertainment programs besides the NBA and the NFL or whatever. And I'm just looking at what else is on. It's like, that's the only, it was the only thing on TV besides that. Like, everything else is reruns or old movies. If you look at so many of the cable networks, it's just reruns and old movies all day, and maybe like one piece of original programming, if that. So there's already very little content that's out there on a lot of these channels now. I was also thinking about this with Comedy Central, because I remember about a decade ago, I thought Comedy Central was in sort of like a golden era. It had so many shows that I liked. It had like Review, which is one of my favorites, Nathan For You, had Broad City, Key and Peele, just so much good original content. Kroll Show. And now if you look at it, it's like the only new thing they have on the entire schedule is The Daily Show. And I guess South Park's going to come back at some point. It's like everything else is reruns. And then I started like getting into the weeds more, and it's like every American cable company, a cable channel is like that almost. I guess some of the bigger ones have their own reality shows and stuff, but the amount of original programming on these channels has dwindled so much that I don't know. I just feel like cable is almost like giving up in terms of it wanting to exist.
Yeah, like it feels like all cable channels are slowly becoming what used to be the oddity channel, where like which is not the official name of a channel, but like when I remember getting like a cable box decades ago for the first time, where all of a sudden, instead of having 60 channels, I have access to like 300 or 200. It was like, 280. You would just flip up way on the channels and you'd be like, there's a channel 287 that's showing nothing but reruns of the Rockford Files and Match Game PM. And it's like, I don't know how they're making money, but apparently somehow someone has decided this works. And it feels like slowly every channel is becoming that, like what you're saying, where it's like the number of hours of reruns to original content, the ratio is just getting more and more swayed towards the former. And yeah, eventually we will be living in a world where maybe every TV channel is just aimed at the elderly and like, remember this, and this is cheap to produce.
I mean, when you say one day, that's basically what it is now. So like, I mean, again, unless you're like a channel that has sports, and I guess that's why AEW will remain valuable to Warner Brothers Discovery, even as the ratings sink, because there's nothing else on cable.
Yeah, like if you look at the ratings charts for cable, the stuff that draws is almost always just pro wrestling, news, mostly Fox News, the sports, and a few reality shows. So like that basically is what rules cable at this point, which is depressing on a number of fronts. But,
yeah, I mean, listen, every generation laments the past, so the older generation when I was growing up probably thought cable TV was trash in itself. I greatly mourn the loss of a robust TV landscape because I grew up on watching too much TV. So I just remember like, oh my God, there were all these shows and now there's really not. Except unless you watch Netflix and you get into the weeds of that and there's a million things you've never heard of and they just produce insane amounts of content that they cancel after 1 or 2 years. But still different from what it was like when I was binging in the old-fashioned way hours and hours of random TV shows.
Well, Matt, now that we've, as always, bemoaned the fate of the world today, we can go back into the comforting arms of nostalgia, revealing a very important show in the history of Ring of Honor. 5th year festival finale took place March 4th, 2007 at the Liverpool Olympia in Liverpool, England, in front of a reported crowd of 1,250 fans. This is the end of the 6th show 5th year festival saga. It is the only show not named 5th year festival : name of the city that we're performing in, because obviously they ran 2 straight nights in Liverpool and they ran there the night before, so they already used it up. Since this is the last 5th year festival series show, we open for the last time, gonna hate to see him go, Matt, with a resolution to the cliffhanger that ended the previous 5th year festival show, because every one of these 5th year shows ended with an incredible cliffhanger, a mind-bending cliffhanger. You could never predict what was gonna happen. Like when Roderick Strong told you he was going to reveal who attacked Jack Evans, and then the next show he said it was me. So anyway, the cliffhanger at the end of the last show was Jimmy Jacobs brawling with BJ Whitmer in a basement in complete blackness, and this creates a hilarious opening, because that means if you start this DVD with no context, if you did not watch the last DVD, you begin the show with, I would say, like 10 to 13 seconds of complete blackness and the sounds of 2 men either fighting or having rough sex. And you might wonder, like, I think you could legitimately wonder if you put this DVD in, like, is the picture on my DVD not working? Like, because there's no explanation until you kind of realize a few, like 10 seconds in, you get a little bit of like, they're backstage somewhere.
It's a reverse last episode of The Sopranos. Because young people.
On.
Yeah, I was going to say
the opening to the 5th year festival.
Yes. Because for young folks out there, the end of Sopranos had a surprising and abrupt moment that caused people to think that their TVs were broken. I'm not going to say any more, lest there be anyone get mad at me for spoilers for a show that ended 18 years ago. But just know that's the joke I'm making. Thank you.
It was a great joke. So yeah, around 13 seconds, and I actually timed it because I was just so amused by the choice to start the show for without context with a completely dark screen. Around 13 seconds in, we see BJ Whitmer come into a pocket of light. He says, "Get that camera out of my face," and that is the end of the opening segment.
These cliffhangers were garbage. Like it's not a cliffhanger to be like we're brawling and then stay tuned. Oh, there's the last few seconds of this brawl where nothing else happens. Like that's not a cliffhanger. I'm sorry.
Like, I can relate to that because, like, haven't we all been like probably Gabe Sapolsky was here, which is you come with an idea and you're like, you know what, I'm going to do 10 days, like a new idea every day or something. And like by day, like a New Year's resolution, where you're like, every day in January, I'm going to try something new. And like by day, like 15, you're like, well, I guess I could put the jelly on the bread before the peanut butter. And you're like, that counts as new, right? Like you're like, oh, my mind bit off more than it can actually chew here. I am not that creative, but, there's an interesting note from the PW Torch live report from John McKay, who wrote at the time that this show started at 6 p.m. Prior to the start, Jimmy Jacobs and BJ Whitmer went brawling through the crowd by the entrance ramp to set up their Falls Count Anywhere match later in the night. So, while the conceit, if you're watching the DVD at home, is that like they've been brawling backstage, they were trying to even sell that to the fans there. Where like, oh, they're basically brawling for like the first half an hour of the show, which it's kind of crazy to think about, because if like they were really as brawling from before the start of the show to now, like that'd be like one of the longest crowd brawls probably in wrestling history. But I appreciate them trying to do crazy things like that. We then immediately cut to our final airing of the ROH 5th Year Festival video package that has been on all of these shows. And then we go elsewhere backstage where the Briscoes are in front of a dingy brick wall and some pipes. I have to say something that, like, the Olympia in Liverpool, the building where the wrestling happens, the main building, I think it looks very good. It looks even a little bit classy in different shots. But every backstage scene we've seen looks like that house from the end of the Blair Witch Project. Like, it could not, they need to renovate the backstage area. It could not look dingier and more low rent.
But but you know what? That makes it ROH. If they were in a building where the backstage didn't look like that, just would not feel like true Ring of Honor.
Yeah, you know what, Matt? You're right. And when you're right, which you almost always are, you're right. But anyway, Jay and Mark, they are bummed, talking to each other about how already twice in 2007 they've won a tag title and lost it in their first defense. First in Noah when they won the junior tag titles on their first tour of Noah early on in the year, and now in Ring of Honor the night before. They think Mark says they're getting soft. Jay agrees. Mark says they've got to toughen each other up tonight, and they progress to start shoving each other and getting excited about manning up tonight. So they are wrestling each other tonight. So a little Briscoes promo to start us off. And that brings us to our opening match. Delirious defeats Colt Cabana via pinfall, 11 minutes, 43 seconds with a roll-up. Before the match starts, Colt Cabana's music starts playing, but then stops and new music plays, and out comes Colt, dressed up in Big Daddy-themed entrance attire in a special singlet that has Colt Daddy written on it, as well as carrying a plastic baby while saying easy, which is Big Daddy's catchphrase. Colt even lifts a grown fan over the barricade and carries him to ringside, followed by what I would describe as a confused and slightly nervous-looking young boy who I don't know if he wanted to be lifted over the barricade temporarily.
Right. It's different when you're being picked up by a Big Daddy. It's who's a famous TV star. It's another thing to be picked up by like an indie wrestler that probably like your dad knows who he is, but you have no idea. And it's the first time you've ever been to a wrestling show, and it's just some guy walking you around. It's probably a little bit disconcerting.
So Colt then dresses Delirious, who is still staying motionless in the corner until the bell rings, like his normal gimmick, and he puts on all his Big Daddy attire on Delirious, his vest and hat. And when the bell does ring, it's Colt who runs wild and Delirious who gets scared for once. So Matt, before I throw it to you, I will just say this. When I ended the last episode of the pod, as I usually do, I run down a few highlights of what's to come on the next show that we're going to cover. And I was listing off some of the matches on the show, and obviously there's some big matches on the show. And then I included Delirious and Colt at the end, and you kind of laughed at me saying Delirious and Colt in a comedy match like that was on the level of the other things. And I will say, like, in a weird way, this match does feel kind of significant to me because these are probably the two premier comedy wrestlers that Ring of Honor had in the Gabe Sapolsky era, and they actually have a lot of similarities in that they're both really versatile utility men. They can do comedy matches. They can also do good serious matches with the right opponent. They can work great as openers, but they can work up and down the card. Even we've seen them in main events occasionally, again with the right opponent. And I prefer Colt to Delirious, but knowing in hindsight that Colt was not long for Ring of Honor at this point, this almost feels like a kind of a handoff match of like Colt being like, you're the comedy boy, Matt, now, dog. Matt, what do you think about this? What do you think about this incredible changing of the guard match?
I'm going to make a shirt that says "You're the comedy boy, man, now, dog." There's boy, man, and dog on the shirt. So those are the big three. But yeah, okay, I'll give it to you. Like, this match was more unique and fun than I would have expected, and that I think they, not that I wouldn't have expected an enjoyable match, but they did a lot of stuff that, maybe I haven't seen them do before, which is always nice. Now, for all I know, they had this match like 6 times on other indies. I'm sure they did wrestle each other on other indies at different points. So none of this might be new to certain people, but for me, I think some of the sticks were new. Like, I can't remember anyone else doing the thing where when the bell rang, they went crazy, which threw off Delirious. Can you remember a time that you've seen anyone else do that?
No, and I would say I can't remember another match quite like this where Delirious basically plays the straight man, kind of.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good way of putting it. Like, there's a spot where he gets angry and he's like yelling that that Colt stole his gimmick, and he chucks a chair into the ring and he walks around ringside grabbing hats off people's heads and throwing them into the ring, which I hope those people got their hats back. But, I
think you can see Colt like grabbing them and like throwing them back and apologizing, I think at some point maybe.
Yeah. And then there's another spot where like, a baby doll, not like Baby Doll, the famous wrestling ballet, but a baby doll gets thrown at Cabana by Delirious. I don't know if that came from the crowd too. I guess it must have. And Colt tells Sinclair that it looks like him, first of all, and then he chucks down the doll and says, "I hate you," because he's mad that Delirious abused the doll, which he was abusing it too. He chucked the doll down. Then eventually Colt demands an apology from Delirious, and they hug it out, but then Colt uses that as an opportunity to finally lock up. He tricked him into locking up with him, basically, is what happened. And they continue to do fun spots. Colt turns Delirious' mask sideways to temporarily blind Delirious because his eyes are not around the eye holes. So Delirious keeps doing stuff to Todd Sinclair. He does a roll up, does a schoolboy. Colt counts. He does an O'Connor roll. Delirious gets Sinclair in a waist lock, and then he ends up like feeling up Sinclair, and he realizes that it is not Colt, of course. And he does some body shaming jokes to Sinclair, and so Sinclair shoves him. Delirious trips over Cabana, and Cabana rolls him up for 2. So, that's all fun stuff. There's a spot later on where Delirious catches Cabana's legs when Cabana jumps at him, but and Cabana falls down and twists Delirious' mask again, which elicits boos this time. And the crowd boos so much when Cabana goes after the mask that Cabana actually yells, "Sorry." Like, he doesn't want that kind of heel heat. That's not what he's going for here. He's like, "I thought I was just bringing joy, but I am instead making you mad, so I apologize." And then I'd say the last couple of minutes is just fairly boilerplate. Like, they're basically just like, okay, we did the part we're here for. Now let's just do a bunch of roll-ups till we get to the end. We don't really care about this anymore. So the ending wasn't really much. It was just sort of like they had to go through it. But that early part of the match did have a lot of fun comedy. Certainly not an amazing match, but one of the better comedy matches we've seen in a while, I would say.
I probably like this a little less than you. This match was almost entirely comedy, and for me, successful comedy matches fall into 2 camps. Ones where I feel like I enjoyed them as much as the crowd did, and ones where the crowd clearly had a better time than I did. And usually when a match is the latter, I find it's because it's a comedy match full of little crowd interactions and gestures I can't hear and see. A match that would like literally be better in the building. And I feel like this is a weird example where I think this is a comedy match where I got all the jokes. I didn't feel like I missed anything, but I don't feel I still feel like it would have been more enjoyable if I was in the building for some reason. There are so many bits here. You mentioned most of them. Colt twisting Delirious's mask and blinding him, and then which allows them to do a sequence I believe we have seen Colt do before in Ring of Honor with the whole like the ref gets mixed up with an opponent and Colt counts a pin on the ref stuff. There, a lot of stuff related to that baby doll Colt brought to the ring. Delirious mistreats it. We get a baby killer chant at one point. I thought it was all cute. It didn't really have me in stitches.
Gene Snitsky should have shown up and yelled that it wasn't his fault.
That would imagine if Baby Doll, the wrestling manager, and Gene Snitsky showed up. Well, imagine what a great night that would have been. But
clearly pandering to the British fans who had great history with both of those characters.
I feel like the most interesting part of the match for me was like what I mentioned earlier, which was just the role reversal of you never see Delirious be the straight man. He's the one that gets spooked by Colt in the entrance. He's throwing the tantrum, that Colt ripped him off, like you said. When Colt calls Delirious's mom easy at one point, Delirious acts heartbroken and the crowd chants, "Say you're sorry" at Colt. And later on, Delirious gets mad at some of Colt's chicanery and he goes, and you hear Delirious in like perfect English say, "That's despicable," which leads to a "That's despicable" chant, which was fun for me because for a second I could close my eyes and pretend that Daffy Duck was wrestling for Ring of Honor for a minute. And, yeah, there is a very little serious wrestling here, mostly at the end, and I agree with you, that wasn't the highlight of the match. I felt, quite frankly, it was slightly sloppy and not either guy's best stuff. Overall,
they were just trying to get to the finish. They were just like, how do we end this? That's all it was there.
Yeah, I agree. Overall, I'd give this a slightly above average for my personal view, while simultaneously acknowledging that this is the exact match these two should have had against each other on this show in front of this crowd, and it really worked for this crowd. They got a ton of applause after the match, not in terms of it being super loud. Like, it was average loud, but there was just some people that they just decided to clap for a very long time for this match. So I was like worried for their hands, but and if you a little Easter egg, not that's really an Easter egg, but like Delirious actually goes to the trouble of licking ROH owner Kerry Silkin's head, who is sitting at ringside, as he often is, after the match. And it must be great to have a relationship with the owner close enough to know I can get away with licking their head. Because I imagine most people don't.
By the way, Trevor, did you notice that they're using the hard camera a little bit more on this show than they did on the other other Liverpool show, and the hard camera looks a little better and maybe a little bit closer than it did on the last two Liverpool shows? Like they might have fixed whatever the problem was.
You know what? I didn't notice that, and now you bring it up, like I immediately realize you're right. Like, because I did not notice as many handheld.
It was still a 3-camera edit, but they didn't seem to be as shy about using the hard cam.
It's kind of amazing that it took them 3 shows in this building to because I was starting to think, is there just something to do with the equipment they have there or the way the building is set up or something? So yeah, the fact that you're right is kind of blowing my mind, because it took you 3 shows to figure out a way to make this a bit closer to your standard. This is on akin to how felt for such a long time Ring of Honor did not have a handle on something as simple as white balancing the cameras so they all look the same when you cut away from things.
You could either be appalled by the amateurishness, or you could just say it's part of the charm.
That's what I say to a lot of people in my life. But we then go to Roderick Strong and Davey Richards backstage. Roddy brags about making the FIP title a world title last night when he defended it outside of the U.S. And he says tonight he becomes a double champ. Davey says tonight for Shingo and Doi there will be no remorse. At this point, BJ Whitmer and Jimmy Jacobs brawl past Roddy and Davey as they work their way through the backstage area. So again, continuing the conceit that the idea that these guys, they're just brawling for basically the first half hour of the show at least.
I do like that when they brawled by, Davey Richards was like, "Who's that? BJ?" Just the idea that they went by so fast that you couldn't make out who they were. They were brawling at the speed of sound.
Yeah, if Ring of Honor had access to CG, maybe they would have done one of those cartoon kind of dust clouds with just hands, fists, and feet popping out of it, rolling by them. That would have been great. So yeah, our second match on the show, the Dangerous Angels of Allison Danger and Sarah Del Rey defeated Eden Black and Jetta in 6 minutes 28 seconds when Del Rey pinned Jetta after hitting the Royal Butterfly Slam. This would be Jetta and Eden Black's first and last match ever in Ring of Honor, although both would get some bookings in Shimmer. They set it up on the previous night's show, which we talked about on that episode of the pod. Eden Black would retire from wrestling a year after this in 2008. Jetta would retire in 2011. She came out of retirement a few years later and wrestled again for many years until retiring a second time just a few months ago in 2024. It's always a bit of a trip on shows like this where it's overseas shows, not in your home market, where the hometown team gets booed over the foreigners. And we
even got some USA chants, which I thought was very funny.
Yeah, it was bizarre. I saw one live report say it was one U.S. fan trying to start those chants. I was like, one, other people joined in those chants, and do you know for sure, or is that just wishful thinking? Because maybe someone came from the U.S. and decided they were going to be ultra pro ugly American. I'm going to chant USA in a UK show on a card full of USA people. Obviously, they probably picked this match for this was the only match on the show with USA chants, probably because the Dangerous Angels wear USA flag themed gear. But
I think there might have been a little bit in the tag title match, but much more minor compared to this.
Just feels so bizarre. But Jetta and Eden are booed as soon as they come out. They're playing full-blown heels here. They do some light cheating in the match, and they're also they're full of piss and vinegar, Matt. Jetta is swearing up a storm as she goes through the ring. She calls a fan a prick and cusses him out. Eden is flipping off the crowd. Just two very rude people, Matt. But then it leads to a really weird moment, as you already tipped. The Dangerous Angels, clearly the fan favorites. The fans are cheering them. But then one fan does decide to start a USA chant. And I guess since the Dangerous Angels wear that US themed gear. And then you hear a few fans start to boo that, and then a medium volume chant of USA starts to come from a portion of the British crowd, and then some other fans start cheering for England as Jetta and Eden Black, who are the heels, start to encourage them to chant for the UK. So for a second I was like, this match is on the verge of getting really bizarre with a very confused crowd, but in fact my worries for nothing, because for basically the body of the match, this is clearly the ROH women are the faces, the British women are the heels. Everyone reacts as such apart from this kind of weird moment before the match. This match goes 6 minutes for 4 people to share, so there's a limit to how much each of them gets to show. We get some very basic wrestling to start, but eventually they begin to bust out the flashier stuff, particularly Eden Black. Although I want to say, at one point, she does a triangle choke, and Dave Prazak says it's called the Garden of Eden, and I think, okay, sure, her name's Eden Black, Garden of Eden. I get it, that's clever. And then later she does a crucifix bomb, and Prazak says that she calls that move blaxploitation.
Boy, did I notice that too.
And I don't think that's a big deal or anything, but it's weird to watch 4 white women wrestle, and all of a sudden you hear the word blaxploitation.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it probably didn't seem as crazy in the UK as it would seem here. I feel like even in 2007, people would be like, maybe not what you would call your move, but I don't know. Yeah, I think a pretty crazy name for a Northern Lights bomb by a white British lady.
Well, if you're me, though, you just start thinking of 70s Pam Grier movies and Blackula. So in other words, this was an amazing match that just prompted so many amazing memories. Actually, I would call this match average, Matt. I thought it was a short standard tag with a few fun moments, including one spot I really liked where Allison Danger monkey flipped Eden, but Eden grabbed hold of Danger's legs mid-monkey flip to seamlessly turn it into a cradle for a pin attempt. And I thought that was just a really cool spot. The one thing I thought about after watching this match, though, was I think if I was advising the Dangerous Angels' career at this time, which, clearly they would have needed my help, I would have told them to just lean into the stiffness and ass-kicking as much as they could, because watching this match, I felt like in 2007, we were at this point in U.S. indie wrestling where we were starting to break out of the idea that women's wrestling was just an excuse for TNA. Fans were starting to accept it more on more shows, and, Shimmer was starting to rise. But I feel like parts of serious women's wrestling were still a novelty to a large portion of the fans seeing these matches. And I feel like there was this novelty where seeing women hit hard and beat people down got more of a reaction from some of the fans of the crowd because of that, because it was just a little more unexpected, a little more newer to them. Like, you watch this match, just simple hard forearms from Allison Danger or a big slap to the face from Del Rey. Those are spots you see in a million matches, but here they feel like highlights because the crowd's like really popping for them, because probably some of those fans are like, oh, we're just not, we weren't watching 90s All Japan women. We're not used to seeing just women being allowed to kick ass. And the little bit of women's wrestling ROH has had up to this point, I feel like in so far, it's been mostly women trying to do variations of the generic men's work rate indie match of the day, fast paced, big flashy moves, and occasional dive. And that's fine. Women's wrestling should be as varied as men's wrestling. There should be a million styles. But there is something about that recent match we saw where Lacey just beat the crap out of Daisy Hayes, or just the authority Mercedes Martinez has had in landing some of her moves in the few matches we've seen from her in Ring of Honor, or moments in this match where it really made me think, in this era, the quickest way for this generation of women to stand out in places like Ring of Honor probably would have just been like, especially when you're giving them such limited ring time, would have been just like blow the fans' minds by just stiffing each other, just hit each other hard and like give them that novelty, like use the fact that people underestimate what your gender can do in this era to your advantage. But overall, nothing really significant about this match except for the fact that it's still kind of crazy that Ring of Honor, given how short shrift they gave a women's wrestling at this point, flew a couple women over and had them work both these very big shows for the company.
Yeah, well, what's cool about this match is it wasn't so novel for Sarah Del Rey to show a lot of that stiffness you were talking about. But I feel like Allison Danger really turned that on in this match too. And I think in some ways, to me, she stood out to me as the best in the match because of her intensity and her strikes. I think that she stood out as doing better than normal when it comes to that. And, it made me pretty impressed. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, I think I did like that they tried to do a hotter finishing sequence than in a lot of the women's matches. Like, I think I would have enjoyed that more if they did that the night before between Danger and Del Rey, but they didn't. So I did think that elevated the match a little bit. And, but yeah, otherwise, pretty basic match. The only other thing to note is Eden Black's outfit was very 2000s indie. Like, it was just, she had on like b-boy shiny shorts, like long shiny short, like that the wrestler b-boy would wear, but then also like a basketball jersey kind of. It was just very like, this is somebody at a lower level IWA Mid-South show in 2002 would wear, which I'm not in criticizing that either. I think that's very charming and I appreciate it.
Yeah, I was going to say, you were talking earlier about a couple of things saying like, oh, that's the charm of indie shows. To me, that was kind of the charm of the indie shows. Like, it's weird because we recently covered, but I was like getting like you were saying, like 2003 nostalgia flashbacks to the era where, yeah, that was much more, it feels like we're transitioning out of that, sadly, in the era we're covering where it is becoming, you talked about body shaming of Todd Sinclair. I think at this point, enough guys had done gear shaming that we were losing the era of, I had someone stitch a logo onto this pair of cool basketball shorts, and that's my ring gear. And yeah, we're all the poorer for it, Matt. But
bring it back, everybody. Bring it back.
But after the match, all four women shake hands, but we are quickly informed by the commentators that something's going on in the back of the building. And what I think in a cool moment, we get a ringside handheld camera. It quickly turns around from the ring, and we're like with the camera as the guy holding it races to the back of the building to find Whitmer and Jacobs Brawl spilling into the crowd from the back of the building. So there's no camera cut. It just like immediately transitions from the end of the match. You hear the announcer say like, oh my God, something's happening in the back. And the camera, we just run with the camera literally to the back to see them brawling. And Jimmy Jacobs and Whitmer's brawl spills into the crowd at the back of the building, like I said. Within seconds, Bobby Cruz is on the mic announcing that the Whitmer versus Jacobs in a Falls Count Anywhere match is starting right now. So in a Falls Count Anywhere match, BJ Whitmer defeated Jimmy Jacobs via pinfall in 12 minutes, 32 seconds after hitting a brainbuster on the entrance ramp. So yeah, Matt, this is they've only got one more double shot weekend after this in the feud in Ring of Honor. So we're coming to the end where the big guns are being pulled out. What do you think about this as a Falls Count Anywhere match?
This was definitely a sprint version of their match, where they just do all action, and the crowd was very hot for it. I mean, this is a great crowd, all night, but they're very hot for this. They did a lot of crowd brawling early, and a lot of it is fairly boilerplate, but they try to work in some novel stuff. They go up the stairs. There's a lot of stairs, a winding staircase up to this balcony. Jacobs finds some fire extinguishers to attack Whitmer with. He doesn't spray the extinguisher, he just hits him with it. Maybe this could have used an extinguisher spray, but probably in a situation like that, you need to get permission from the building to use their fire extinguisher. But Jacobs does a couple of classic, like, roll all the way down the stairs bumps. Which I always appreciate. Whitmer teases a powerbomb off the balcony, and while it seems insane, given their history, it's not so far-fetched, so the crowd totally buys it as a possibility, so that helps that Whitmer has already done insane powerbombs to Jacobs. Jacobs does actually tease falling all the way over the balcony, but he hangs on and brings himself back in, which that seems a little bit dangerous too. They eventually it becomes samey, but then to break up the monotony, Jacobs does a pretty cool leap off a little platform into a Rana, and then immediately, what I really liked about this spot was that he didn't do a long dramatic setup. He just ran back up the balcony and hit a flying crossbody to the floor. The crowd went crazy for that. I like that because it's less contrived when you do it fast, as opposed to trying to milk it and be dramatic. Not that there's not a place for that, but I did appreciate that he just went boom right into this crossbody. At this point, we noticed that Jacobs has a big gash on his leg. I don't know. Do you know how he got that? Was it clear?
Yeah. I only noticed it when you did right after the dive. So I'm wondering, was it from rolling down the stairs? Did he hit something on the dive? I'm not sure. I wonder. I don't know. I would guess rolling down the stairs might do that. Who knows?
Yeah.
He also gets there's that spot also. Didn't it already have happened at that point where BJ there's a bar kind of, and BJ throws him down the bar in an old Western movie where he's knocking over a couple drinks that.
So Glass maybe did it.
Yeah. Who? You know what? There's probably 3 or 4 different things where he could have cut his leg up to that point in the match already.
Yeah. Actually, I think the coolest thing Jacobs did during the crowd brawl section was he ran across a row of chairs and dropped an elbow. So I thought that Jacobs was really pretty awesome during this crowd brawl, to be honest. And then finally they get back inside the ring, which the crowd on the other side of the building definitely appreciated. And that's when we start getting Jacobs doing the spike gimmick. He goes right into Whitmer's head without resistance, and Whitmer does a great gushing spike blade job, which, maybe he could have given some advice to someone later in the show about doing a blade job. But this was just an immediate gusher. It really looked this spike, gashed Whitmer's head, but obviously it was a blade job. And we get, a bunch more spike stuff. Jacobs paints himself with Whitmer's blood and lets it drip onto him. Not into his mouth like Hangman Page does, but, this is the evolution of that. He rubs his head into the mat on Whitmer's blood stain. So, pretty evocative stuff, Trevor. There's a spot where Whitmer avoids a spike in the corner and gets Jacobs on his shoulders, but then Jacobs spikes him from above, then immediately poison Ranas him. Which I thought was pretty awesome. Goes for the Contra Code, but Whitmer reverses that into an adrenaline spike tombstone. Gets a dramatic near fall off that. Whitmer's white shorts, by the way, are totally bloodstained. He tries to powerbomb Jacobs on the ramp. Jacobs escape. He goes for a spear, but Whitmer drop kicks him in the face, brainbusters him on the ramp, gets the 3 count. I thought that match was so much fun. It was high intensity, great crowd reactions. Didn't overstay its welcome at all. It was. You mentioned TNA about the women in the past match, but this I thought was total nonstop action. And I liked that it set the stage for the bigger blow-off at Supercard of Honor, but honestly, I was satisfied with this. I thought this was a hoot and a half. And the great crowd helped, but just they didn't fuck around. They made it all killer, no filler, and that's what I appreciated.
on the last episode, I talked about how crowd brawls are better when you're brawling in cool, unique venues and exploring the space. And I really felt like they did that here. Like the first half of this match is in the back of the building, and I felt like they really took advantage of that. Like this is a building with multiple stories. So like you mentioned, they go up multiple flights of stairs. Jimmy gets dragged across that little balcony bar. Like I said, he knocks over things, it was just a neat little spot. Jimmy, when he just comes across 2 fire extinguishers, he decides to hit some Whitmer with it. And I agree with you. I thought like Jimmy Jacobs in the first half of the match where it was in the crowd, I felt like he was just an absolute madman. He has this big knee brace on now because he's needs surgery. He's only going to be on a couple more shows. He's kind of like Jimmy Ravens on the show. He's toughing things out until he can end a feud and then go get some surgery. And he's just going nuts here for a guy that needs surgery. Like rolling down those flights of stairs, almost getting thrown over that first story balcony, like you said. He's literally all the way over and just holding onto the guardrail, the railing, until he fights his way back up. Like I would have been scared to do that spot, but I'm also a wuss when it comes to heights. The running off the row of stairs, I agree with you that in some ways that was like the most athletically impressive thing because, if one of those chairs goes off balance, he ran off this row of them so quick and then jumped off and launched into this little jumping elbow to Whitmer on the floor. I felt like this guy is just fucking going all out in the first half. And that's without mentioning what you brought, like the biggest spot of the match, which is him doing the crossbody off the first story balcony onto Whitmer on the ground floor, which is a spot so spectacular. The crowd actually chants for Jimmy, even though he's the heel in this match. I think another point you brought up, which is great, which is how like when Whitmer teases that he was going to powerbomb Jacobs over the balcony, you think, oh, if you see a spot like that in 99% of matches, you think that could never happen. But because these guys have done crazy spots, there's like a part of you that feels like maybe they could do that. And I think I've talked about this before. To me, some of the best parts of the Whitmer-Jacobs feud is that they took that horrible incident that happened on a botch in one of their first matches where they botched that top rope power bomb and, Whitmer broke his ankle and either of them could have died. And a few of their matches they've had since, they've leaned into that energy where when these two wrestle, anything could happen. They're reckless. Somebody could get hurt. And the first half of this match, I felt like really has that vibe in a good way for me as a viewer. Maybe a bad way for them. I don't know, because sometimes I watch wrestlers take crazy risks and the way they do them, I leave thinking like, okay, that was nuts, but it seems like they really prepared themselves for that spot. Where meanwhile, when these two guys are vibing together, sometimes I feel like it's closer to how I felt watching Sabu matches, where it's like, where you're watching a guy who probably thinks, well, I can probably pull this off and not hurt myself, maybe, there's even like this minor moment early in the match where it just adds to this chaotic feeling that something could go wrong or crazy or out of control with these guys, because there's a moment early on where a fan gets too close to Jimmy in the crowd and Jimmy threatens to punch him. He actually throws a punch at the fan, but it's clearly a punch purposely meant to come up short. And then the thing I couldn't believe is 20 seconds later, like Jimmy and BJ brawl to a slightly different part of the backstage area, and that fan has followed them there, and he ends up right near Jimmy, and you can hear the fan, if you listen, say to Jimmy, yeah, you can't hit me, you cunt. It's like, holy shit, are you prompting this guy after he took a swing at you? Like, but to me, it just added to it, like, oh, this is going fucking nuts. But then the second half of the match, he gets into the ring. Jimmy hits Whitmer with the spike a few times, like you said. BJ blades, great blade job. And the match slows down, and this section becomes to me a lot more just about BJ bleeding and hitting a few spike shots, including that great moment you mentioned where BJ counters the Contra code and turns into his adrenaline spike, which for those who we haven't told, if you don't know what the adrenaline spike is, it's not just a tombstone, it's a jumping sit-out tombstone pile driver, which is kind of a crazy move. Jimmy, like you said, he gets under a bleeding BJ and tells him to bleed on him, and he gets a bunch of BJ's blood on him. And I think that's another interesting thing where we get from, it's one of those moments we get from rewatching things, knowing where things are going, where I feel like now we've seen like 2 or 3 times Jimmy workshop the I'm going to ask my opponent to bleed on me spot, where clearly he is playing around with this idea, and we're going to see like the highest level of it later in the year with the Jay Briscoe angle. But it's always interesting to go back and kind of see, oh, this guy, almost like when we discovered that Nigel had done the ring post spot in a match no one remembers years before he did it with Danielson, in 2006. These spots where, oh, you can see a wrestler can't with an idea and he's kind of playing around with it, but they're going to use it in a much more famous presentation of it later down the line. To me, the match then goes to the entrance wrap for the final minute, to the spots you talked about. And to me, I felt like that was something I sometimes see in Falls Count Anywhere matches where the wrestlers are almost thinking, you can see them almost thinking, okay, we wrestled the first half in the crowd and the second half of the ring, because the fans at some point are going to want to see us in the ring to get the best view, but it would be dumb to end a Falls Count Anywhere match in the ring. So we have to at least finish it on the ramp. So it's like a very much like, let's just do something on the ramp for the final minute and end the match there so we can say, hey, it was a Falls Count Anywhere match and it did not end in the ring. I thought it was cool seeing Jimmy jump and grab the metal entrance, like metal bar at the top of it and doing the swinging kick from it. I thought that Brainbuster Whitmer won the match with on the ramp it sounded brutal. The drop, it was great. Overall, I'd give this match a very good, like a very high 3.5 to 3 3/4 stars. Not quite great, but really, really enjoyable. I think the first half is super crazy and memorable and exactly what I want from these two in this feud. Maybe it's unfair to hope for them to make the whole match that and never go into the ring where everyone can get a better view of them. But I felt like the second half of the match was good as well, but a step down because it was kind of what we had seen with Colt and Jacobs just 2 shows ago, but not as good. But overall, super memorable stuff here. A really wild, I'm putting my body on the line performance from Jacobs. Really enjoyed this.
I'll just say for myself, I still really liked the part back in the ring. About as much.
It was fun. I just felt like I was so into I feel like I maybe liked the crowd stuff a little bit more than you, even though you sound like you enjoyed it, and you liked the in-ring a little bit more than me, even though I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I just thought the intensity was consistent throughout, and the crowd heat was consistent throughout, and the coolness of the moves they did was consistent throughout. And when you put all those things together, I thought it was a pretty consistently good match.
And John McKay, in his PW Torch Live report of the show, wrote that the crowd at one point chanted, "We can't see shit," when they were brawling in the balcony, to which the fans of the balcony responded with, "Whitmer's winning." So a very helpful section of the crowd there. So after the match, after a long period of selling, a very bloody BJ Whitmer gets to his feet and poses, and we get a pretty big reaction and chant for Whitmer. So again, this last year was the high point of BJ Whitmer's career in terms of, I think, fan love. We then get a shot of just how much blood he had left on the entrance ramp, and it's quite a bit. In fact, that leads to something, Matt, a little trivia bit I got from doing some research for the show. I went back and found I was wondering, did BJ Whitmer talk about this on his shoot interview? Because I am a nerd. And in fact, he did talk about this match, Matt. And so I recapped a bit of it for myself in the notes here. And so from BJ Whitmer's Smart Mark video shoot interview, he says that he thinks that this match was one of his best blade jobs ever. I think we would agree. BJ says he has a picture on his computer of Jimmy backstage after the match. And Jimmy is sitting down smoking a cigarette. And in the picture, Jimmy's arm is so covered in BJ's blood, it looks like he has a fake tan, Whitmer says. I want to know what fake tan at least he's going to, except for the clean skin where he had been wearing his elbow pad. Then BJ adds that one fan bought his blood-covered shorts from this match for 75 pounds, and another bought a blood-soaked towel that he had used in this match for another 75 pounds, with his only request being that BJ sign the towel and take a picture with him. BJ is really happy about this. He happily tells us that with the exchange rate, that means he made an extra $300 for this match. So, one advantage, I guess, Matt, from bloody matches is you can sell your gear for a markup.
Wow.
So I wonder, if you buy bloody gear, how do you, do you just put that in a plastic bag? This would be my concern, Matt. What if someday I'm accused of a crime and people find a bloody t-shirt or shorts or something in my closet in a plastic bag?
Well, I feel like the easiest way to avoid that is don't buy blood-covered clothing from people.
You know what, Matt? I think that's going to be advice I stick to for the
Yeah.
rest of my life.
Don't really.
But
Listen. Everybody has their own stuff. Certainly not something I would ever have considered doing. But I'm glad this person makes it. I'm glad it makes this person happy, and I hope they are never accused of a grisly crime.
like I can see the appeal of stuff like this from like a visceral, like just this was something crazy. I can't believe I own this kind of piece of history. But it is one of those things where I feel like in wrestling, or really in any hobby, but especially in pro wrestling, there's a bunch of things where, like, if you're a fan, there are things that are hard to explain to non-fans. I don't know if there's, speaking as a man who just bought 180 wrestling magazines and was wondering where he's going to store them, I think maybe the hardest thing I could think of as a fan to explain to a non-fan would be why I own blood-covered clothes. But
Yeah, I feel like I don't think I could explain that even as a fan. So,
yeah.
we're all different. I'm trying to think of what the weirdest, like, wrestling related purchase that I've made is. Because I don't get a lot. I'm not a souvenirs guy. Like, I think probably certain times that I've traveled to go to certain shows, maybe that seems like an absurd expense for a lot of people. But I think probably in terms of merchandise that I've bought, it's probably when back in like the mid or early aughts when there were websites selling little packets of like old observers, and I got like all the old observers that covered all the WrestleManias or all the Starcades or something, that I bought, and that were mailed to me, like just like the actual copies of the issues. Like, I guess that was a weird thing to spend money on. Especially as like a college student that didn't have a lot of money in the first place. But otherwise, I don't think I've made any extreme weird wrestling related purchases.
Yeah, me neither. I was definitely like kind of a self-hating wrestling fan as a kid because my parents browbeat me about like liking wrestling and it being low class and for unintelligent people and all that stuff. And so,
What was the classy stuff they wanted you to watch or be into instead? Just like classical music, they want you to play violin.
it wasn't even, you know what it was? I think my parents couldn't understand. Like they were like, you get good grades. Like they felt the way I think a lot of people back then felt, which is the only way you could enjoy wrestling is you thought if it was real. So like they were like, Trevor, you can't think this is real. Like, Trevor, I've seen your math grades. You can't also think these Hulk Hogan punches are real. But it was like they didn't realize that I deep down didn't care about that. But I think they really thought that I thought it was real, no matter what I said, and that I was unintelligent. Like it was it was my fatal flaw. Which, you know what? They wouldn't be wrong about that. So I was embarrassed to the point where when I rented wrestling tapes at video stores, sometimes I would like stick my copy of Survivor Series 1990 like between a copy of like Steve Martin's The Jerk and some other movie that I thought would impress like the cool guy running the video store cash register, almost like me checking out a book about like sex when I was 13, where I would stick it between like a couple Calvin and Hobbes, like, oh, maybe they'll just think this just accidentally got in there and they'll be too polite to tell me, and they'll think, oh, he didn't really want to read about this.
I just can't stop laughing when you're talking about, I'm reading a book about sex and I'm gonna stick it, and I was like, where's he gonna stick it? But it's just okay, yeah.
But so I'll finally just say, I would say the most cringy, hard to explain thing I've ever owned as a wrestling fan, is I did own a WWE the big gold belt replica title for a bunch of years. But in my defense, I did not buy it for myself. I won it in a contest. I was at a theater watching a WWE pay-per-view live when I was younger. They had a trivia contest before the show. I won the trivia contest. I had the belt in my lap the entire show and had people constantly looking over my shoulder to the point where I spent, I think, all of a WrestleMania worried that I was going to get mugged after the show on the way back to a vehicle. And
I feel like winning a wacky souvenir does not count as like a weird purchase.
But it was one of those things where I was kind of embarrassed to own it. And it was one of those things where I went home, I held it a few times. I took a couple of pictures of it. No pictures with myself with it. I don't want evidence of that. I let some friends and family hold it. I marveled, hey, it looks kind of cool. It looks heavy. It sat in my closet for half a decade and then I sold it. So, that is probably the most wrestling fan wrestling thing I've ever had in my possession. But
Man, I wish you had
anyway,
taken. I wish you had taken that picture. We could have made it the logo of the show. I
oh
know. I
god,
know you're famous for sharing photographs of yourself on the internet. I
yes.
know. I definitely know what you look like. Not from 25 years ago.
You know what? I have pictures of me as a baby playing a toy tuba in a bathtub completely naked that I would rather put online than me holding
But Trevor,
a WWE
have you
strap at
allowed
the time.
yourself to be photographed in any way in the past 5 years?
Probably not.
There you go.
I,
No
you know
evidence.
what?
No evidence that this man even physically exists.
You know what?
He
Nope.
is quite literally artificial intelligence, and he's the best we could do. Everybody.
China has developed me for a shockingly low amount of money. But we then cut to Jimmy Rave backstage, who says it all started back in Edison, New Jersey, when Nigel McGuinness decided to pick up a roll of toilet paper and pelt him in the back of the head. At that point, Nigel became just like everyone else, the thing Jimmy despises. When Nigel showed his disrespect to Jimmy, Jimmy says tonight is a fight without honor, and he's going to leave Nigel crippled, torn limb from limb. And after tonight, Nigel and everyone else will give Jimmy the respect that he is demanding. Jimmy at this point then punches a hole in the wall of the building and storms off. And I have to say, I don't think we've ever seen Jimmy Rave cut a promo this emotional in Ring of Honor. Like, he was outright screaming by the end of it, and Jimmy is not a screamy promo kind of guy. So
No, I appreciated it. I also think these walls are probably not so hard to punch a hole in, based on what we've seen from this building. But also, that's not your property, so I hope he didn't get in trouble for that.
you know, maybe they're looking at the rest of the building just thinking, you know what, no one's going to notice this. No one, you know, we're going to assume it was already there. But next up, Matt Sydal defeated Pac via pinfall in 11 minutes, 25 seconds after he hit the Sydal press, aka the shooting star press, but we call it a different name just because Matt Sydal does it. I don't know if you noticed, there's a fun little moment before the match starts where Sydal is in the ring and he you can see him tell the ref, I'm not wrestling the blood on the canvas, and he has the ref clean up the blood. And I guess some fan heckles him for that. And you can see a Sydal earnestly turn to the fan and tell them it's gross.
Yeah, I did enjoy that.
Come
yes.
on.
It is.
So,
He's right, though.
Yeah, that should not be saying you heckle that a wrestler does not want to work in someone else's blood if he doesn't have to.
Also, as he's walking to the ring, someone in the front row calls him a bitch, and he just smiles so big, and he goes, "Oh, say it to the belt, baby." He's enjoying being a heel so much.
Yeah, he's great. So this is another match between two guys I feel like that were crossing paths at different stages in their careers, because Sydal at this point had risen to the status of one of the top high flyers on the indies. He had been going to Dragon Gate. In fact, he still held the Brave Gate title for Dragon Gate at this time. But by the end of the year, he's going to be in WWE. And then Pac, meanwhile, is 20, but he's really just starting to break through to a larger audience and just a few months away from starting, I believe, his first tour ever in Dragon Gate, which will start his run as arguably the best foreigner in the history of Dragon Gate. So in a way, this is another match like Delirious and Colt, where it's like two guys passing in their careers, and Pac is basically preparing to take on the spot on the scene that Sydal's going to be vacating by the end of the year. And this is also a match where I really took a step back and I saw how far we've come, Matt, on through the years. I feel like in the early episodes we were coming into we were watching the Ring of Honor of 5 years earlier, and the top high flyers of the U.S. Indies, they were different, right? Like, they were skinny bean poles, sometimes not even with proper gear, who at any moment they could either do some of the most incredible moves you've ever seen in your life or nearly kill themselves in a complete train wreck.
They were dressing like Eden Black.
Exactly. It was better for it. But 5 years later, we're now I feel like we're now in the era of our rewatch where we are really transitioning into the future of flyers. Guys like Sydal and Pac, who have abs, 4% body fat. They're more well-rounded. They're much more mechanically smooth and consistent. Although, Pac at this point still was, missing a few things, but he's just so ambitious in what he's doing. And I'm on the record that I feel like we've lost some things in that transition, that so many wrestlers now are so well-rounded that we've lost some of the variety. We've lost some of, again, I guess the theme for this show, the indie charm of guys who were nothing but reckless daredevils in the bad gear, who weren't well-rounded. But I also can't say that we didn't gain some things in that transition too. But like half a decade earlier, the state-of-the-art high-flying in the indies looked like Jack Evans and Amazing Red in the SATs and the Special K and all the scramble guys. And now we're in the era where it's starting to look a lot more like Seidel and Pac and soon Ricochet. So it was a match where that kind of hit home to me, like, oh, we really have kind of changed eras in just our span of watching rewatch on the podcast. So on the last show, we saw Pac wrestle Roddy. And that match was all about Roderick bullying Pac and Pac fighting from underneath, and had that contrast between Roddy's offense of beating the shit out of guys and Pac's high flying. I think we both enjoyed that match, but I think I liked the structure of it a bit more than you did. This is a completely different match in that it's just two flyers going back and forth, 50-50, trading moves from start to finish. For me, I preferred the more well-defined roles of the Roddy match, but I can see why some would prefer this. I thought this was also really enjoyable. I watched Pac in this match, and he's only 20, and he can already do things that almost nobody else in wrestling could do. He's already way more polished than a guy that age has any right to be, but there were a couple weird moments in this match. Pac and Seidel botch a big Pac-Rana variation with Seidel. I don't know what happened. Seidel just does not go over for it at all, and Pac just kind of falls to the mat. There was also a weird moment where Pac is sitting on the top turnbuckle. Seidel charges him. Pac gets his feet up. Seidel sells by laying on the mat, but he then sells he puts himself all the way on the other side of the ring, like 3/4 of the way from Pac, who's still sitting on the corner turnbuckle, who seemed to be expecting Seidel to just like bump right at his feet so he could jump off that turnbuckle. And instead, Pac then has to run across the ring, but Pac does, and he just does this crazy flying move off the other turnbuckle to kind of save, just this beautiful twisting dive. When I see Pac here, I feel like he's one of those wrestlers where I would think at the time, this guy already has really rare raw talent. He's far along, and he's so young that if he just gets a little bit more consistent and he develops his personality and ring presence, he's going to be special. And I think if you watch wrestling long enough, you have those thoughts about more than a couple people Pac's age as you watch wrestling. And sometimes they keep growing and find that last 20%, and sometimes they don't. And watching this match, it was really satisfying to know that, like, Pac is one of those guys that found that last 20%, right? Like, I do think he became a really special talent, because there are some guys you feel that about, and they, for whatever reason, their growth stunts and they never become what you think they could be. Pac is one of those guys where whatever you thought he could be watching this match, I think he absolutely did become that guy, which it's a great reminder of that. For the match, again, I missed the structure. I missed the more defined roles. Some moments of this match were not boring, but a little numbing. But there were like 3 to 5 spots of this match where your jaws just drop. Well, I guess not both your jaws, just your bottom jaw dropped. But I
think you only have one jaw, Trevor.
Yeah, okay. I realize. Yeah, the Mando. You know what? Maybe my parents were right that I'm not smart. Anyway, like the black arrow to the floor, from the second night in a row, that crazy twisting dive after Seidel moved all the way to the side of the ring, and there's a snapmare driver Pac takes around the top of his head, and there's this great moment where Seidel has Pac sitting on the top turnbuckle, and he goes to hit a top rope Rana, and as he jumps off the top turnbuckle in midair, Pac just drops to the ring and below him, and Seidel just lands ass and balls first, is the best way I can describe it, on the top turnbuckle, which I would be scared to do that. I'm sure there's a way to do it safely, but you are perilously close to a Mr. Belvedere situation on that spot.
And by the way, double check. You are right. There are 2 jaws.
My God.
Yeah, there's the upper jaw and the lower jaw. Did not want to leave that floating, as you were correct and I was wrong. There is of course, the maxilla and the mandible. So there you go, Trevor. You beat me.
You know what? The problem, whose fault this is? It's Mankind's, because he only told us about the mandible. We never learned about the maxilla. So, if I had known that, it would have been second nature to both of us, I feel like. But by the end of the match, the crowd is chanting, "This is awesome." They're leaping to their feet to applaud as soon as it's over. I'd call this like a very strong good. This is 3.5 stars to me. I could see some liking a bit more than me, but overall, let's just say this: like you have to say, it was a great weekend for Pac. The crowd loved him. He ended both matches more over than he started. If he had lived in the U.S., I feel like, rather than the U.K., I have little doubt that ROH would have booked him like a regular off this weekend alone. I think on an honorable mention that podcast, Shane Hagedorn said, like, he couldn't go in the UK with the rest of the guys, but like when Gabe came back for the UK shows in the office, he was just telling everyone that, like, this Pac guy's incredible. Like, he was just really sky high on him. And we will see Pac for 2 more shows later in the year in the US, and it does not go as well for him. But we will get to that at another time. Matt, I've droned on long enough. What did you think about this match?
Yeah, I thought this was really enjoyable. I thought they matched well. I think you named all of the spots that I would have named. My favorite spot was definitely the one where Pac ducked when Seidel went to leap off the top rope, and then Seidel came hard down on his groin on the top rope. I thought that was a really cool counter. I liked the wacky cradles. I liked how absolutely appalled Lenny Leonard continued to be at how cocky Matt Seidel was with all of his like preening and strutting. He was like, "This guy is so arrogant." He's so, like, he just got so mad about it that I think it helped get Seidel over. You know, it's one of those things where it was like a very heavy-handed Sapolsky-esque sell of Seidel's persona, which I'm sure was by design from Gabe, but I think it was pretty effective. But yeah, as far as the moves, like you said, it was much more of a back and forth, tit for tat than the night before. And I don't know which match I thought was better, and I do think the botch took it down a bit, but as far as botches go, it was extremely well covered for, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I like that Pac got to show what he could do. I think the crowd loved it. The crowd, I think, has elevated every single match on the show. And I thought this was another very good match. Like I would say the second very good match in a row on this show.
Yeah, that's and also you were correct. Like, looking at my notes, you said earlier that you thought there was another USA chant during the show. Looking at my notes, I have written down there is a dueling USA sucks chant during this match. So again, someone decided to chant a USA during a Matt Seidel versus Pac match in the UK. You know what? I'm confused no matter if that's an American fan doing it or a UK fan doing it for different reasons. But like, I don't know why you'd be doing that, but you do you, champ. After the match, the crowd for the second straight night chants "Bring Back Pac," which is just a very catchy thing to chant. And Seidel even shakes Pac's hand. So I don't know if that's just him trying to straddle the line right now of being kind of a heel, but not totally over the line, or if he was literally just like, you know what, this guy's so impressive, he's earned it. I want to give him that credibility.
Sometimes in ROH, because there's still the code of honor, you still have heels who do the handshakes, and then there's like that, and then there's the more dastardly heels that don't. I think there's still a delineation between the two levels of heeldom.
We then get an ad for ROHWrestling.com's merch store, and then we get in a big match, especially in terms of time. This is Jay Briscoe and Mark Briscoe went to a draw after a double KO in 27 minutes, 5 seconds, the longest match on the show, on the whole weekend, I believe. The Briscoes come out together, which I thought was a really cool touch, just one theme, and they walk out together. Jay's in black trunks, Mark's in white, and we get dueling "Let's Go Briscoes" chant, which Jay, you can see like laugh in the ring at, but eventually the crowd gets on it and decides to do a "Let's Go Jay, Let's Go Mark" chant. So this is not the first time the Briscoes wrestled each other, and it's not even the first or second time we've seen the Briscoes wrestle each other in ROH on Through the Years. And it also wouldn't be the last. They wrestle each other a few more times after this, including a match on the Jericho Cruise, a match that the Fight on the Farm cinematic match during the pandemic. But this is the first match we've seen from them in quite a while, and I feel like it's the first time we've seen them wrestle each other in this era of the Briscoes, the comeback from a brief break. Briscoes, we put on more muscle and become men Briscoes. What do you think about this match, Matt, looking back on after all these years?
Well, I for some reason I gamed it out like I wasn't going to get to go first on this, but I'm happy that I did, because I was wrong about my count of like the alternation between the different matches. But
Matt, sometimes even I screw that up, so you can never rely on what I'm going to do. But I think this time, in fact, it really was your turn.
Yes, and I'm glad, because this match was a meaty match, meaning like besides just meaty men slapping meat, not that they're like meaty in like the Big E sense, but you know what I mean. They're big guys, they hit each other hard. But also I think there's stuff to talk about, because I know how much you loved the 2002 match that these two had against each other in Boston. It was one of your favorite matches of that year. I obviously thought it was great. Also, that match has had a very specific type of psychology. Obviously Mark was the heel. He was younger. He was like, it was a shock that he was able to best his older brother and bloody him up. And this was different. This match did not have long-term selling in the sense of like we're working over a body part or anything like that. But it would certainly be wrong to say this match didn't have psychology and didn't have selling. The story of this match was basically that these two guys wanted to give each other everything they could give each other, and to get to the point where nothing anyone else could do to them would be able to put them down because they had already given each other the best. And they did. They went out there and did like a lot of shit. Like, I'm not going to say they did every single thing they could do because we know they didn't, but they did a lot. And it was just a lot of big moves near the end. The selling was that they were selling cumulatively extreme exhaustion by the end of the match. That they had just done everything that they could to each other for a half hour, and they hit each other with each other's finishers, and neither could go anymore. And I thought that was a great story. The crowd's not super loud during the early back and forth wrestling, but they make sure they pepper in some chants just to let them know, like, we're watching, we care, we're not bored here. One of the early big spots is Jay catching. They're basically hitting each other hard in the middle of the ring, and Jay catches Mark with a big clothesline that sends them both to the floor. And Jay slams Mark on the wooden floor. And the guardrails on this show are a lot weaker than the typical guardrails they have in the U.S. So anytime somebody gets sent into them, they basically get knocked over. So Mark whips Jay into the guardrail, and it basically knocks down the guardrail. And then Mark sets it back up so he can moonsault off the guardrail onto Jay on the floor. At one point, Jay backdrops Mark over the guardrail, and Leonard says that Jay sends Mark teapot over kettle into the guardrail, which I don't think that's the expression, right? It's
my dad would always say ass over tea kettle.
Right, that's the one that I've heard. So maybe they're two separate expressions. I don't know, but
maybe that's a very British thing, because I could see Brits having a teapot and a kettle, and so maybe that's the British expression. Like, oi, you. Okay, I'm not even going to attempt.
Yeah. I wouldn't.
Edit. No edit. But okay.
Or else I'm going to have to start dropping my my Canadian accent on you.
Okay.
But they but they do some fighting on the ramp too. Mark suplexes Jay on the ramp. They don't really sell that right back in the ring. They pick up the pace. Jay hits a Rana. Mark hits a big drop kick, and they strike a lot. The strikes they keep giving each other, I will say, add a lot of grit to the match, because they are certainly not afraid to hit each other hard, as I'm sure they've done their whole lives. All of Mark's offense, he's in control, I think, for a lot of this. It looks good. He does inside-out double stomp, the twisting springboard senton. Once Jay's in control, he kind of slows it down, gets a Japanese stranglehold on. In some ways, this is like a typical Briscoes match in the sense that it goes back and forth. But in other ways, I would say like there are some significant control sequences for each guy. As the match goes on, we get more back into those quick shifts in momentum, where they get into a bunch of slap fights and forearm fights, and Jay backdrops Mark to the apron, and Mark tries to springboard in, but Jay drop kicks him out of the air onto the floor, and then hits his big running somersault dive. And then a frog splash, basically flying all the way across the ring to hit that. Mark comes back, redneck kung fu, springboard cutter. He does this almost like weird, like run up shining wizard type of knee move against the ropes, which I thought was pretty cool. They're just hitting a lot of big moves, and we're getting a lot of ROH chants at that point because the crowd's just into all the moves. And I could see somebody not loving this section of the match because it is just move, but I think I appreciate it because I think it does build to something. Mark goes for a superplex. Jay reverses that into a super gourd buster. Both guys are down, and Jay gets up and does almost like a Steiner screwdriver, like a Michinoku driver, like plus on they get to 2 count off that. We actually get almost like a near finish on a stretch plum that Jay puts Mark in, because like we have the arm dropping sequence, and before Mark's arm could drop a third time, Jay just releases it and hits this really big clothesline. At one point, Sinclair gets between them So Mark shoves Sinclair into the corner, and as Sinclair is kneeling, Mark leaps off of Sinclair's back and hits a head scissors onto Jay, who's on the apron, and sends them both to the floor. Mark's done that spot before just from running, but adding the whole leap off the ref's back thing, I think, added to making it a more memorable spot. And I thought that was really cool. And then they go back to trading strikes, and then eventually Jay just boots him, hits a Jay driller, and they both just collapse. Right after the crowd gives him like this standing ovation. Eventually, Jay pops up before a 9 count, stands up with a smile on his face, and the crowd goes nuts as they get back up. Trade strikes again. Both just collapse again. Jay gets up first, pulls Mark back up, starts hitting him again, but Mark just boots him, hits a cutthroat driver out of nowhere. They're both down again, and this time they stay down, both of them, for a 10 count. And although in the first split second after that 10 count the crowd boos, it really is just a split second. They immediately are like, no, never mind. And they start cheering like crazy and chanting Briscoe, Briscoe. They don't even do the 5-bar minutes. I think they decided this is actually the perfect finish. This is what they want. They both gave it their all. Didn't matter who won. The crowd didn't care who won. They just wanted to cheer both of them. And so I actually think it was a good booking decision. Although I will say, I think that doesn't Mark get the moral victory because he hit his move last? I feel like his move was the one that took them both down. So I think he gets the moral victory out of it. But what I liked about the finish was like it still protected their finishers because nobody kicked out of them. They really didn't do a million like over the top near falls. They just brutalized each other, hit a bunch of moves, and then were just out of it. So what I would say is, first of all, the crowd was so insane at the end of this match. They really appreciated this. And in some ways, this was a big, dumb match that was all about hitting big moves. But on the other hand, it was, I think, a pretty smartly worked, or at least smartly laid out match in terms of what I described, right? That they just bombed each other like crazy, eventually could not match each other. No team could match them. And so on that level, the match, I thought, worked a lot. I think your tolerance for it will be based on how much you could deal with not much selling really until the selling of exhaustion at the end. Kind of a bit, like I said, big dumb guy psychology. I think I personally really thought it was a really good match. Like I thought it was a great match because I think ROH needed a match like this right now where they just went balls to the wall, held nothing back, and you knew that they were just trying to give you something special. I think this is what you would expect from this era of Mark versus Jay. I think different eras would produce different types of Briscoe versus Briscoe matches. I think this is the exact one you would have wanted between them in 2007. And I don't think they did anything but deliver. That's my opinion overall.
I remember this match being good, but over long, and I was kind of surprised on rewatch that I didn't really think it was over long at all. I can see why other people would. But one of the reasons I like this match is that it feels like a war. And one of the ways I felt like they made it feel like a war is it's not just the fact that it's going long, but the fact that its length allows them time to sell exhaustion. And maybe that's also one of the things kind of adding to your point about how, yeah, this is kind of a throw a bunch of moves, everything but the kitchen sink match, but there yet still does feel like there's a little more meat to it than that, even if it's not always stuff that's as easily quantifiable as, oh, they worked they worked the leg, or something like that, right? There is something about this that feels different than just move. There's a little more to it. The match never really slows down, but sometimes when I watch long matches, I think if you had condensed them down to a shorter time and made them quicker paced, just on the best parts of it, they'd have a better match. And this is a match where I honestly think if you cut these guys down to the best 12 minutes or even the best 15 and just did the best of what they did of that amount of time, maybe some people think it was a better match. I don't think I would have liked it as much. I liked that they threw in a few submissions throughout the match, even though that sometimes the matches that feels arbitrary padding to me. I liked it in this match for some reasons. So much of this match, especially, I also noticed you hear these two guys, particularly Jay, just heaving air. Jay is just, this is a god. We talk about the Briscoes being like the ultimate of this generation, work our asses off 100% almost every night. Jay, you can just hear he is huffing and puffing. He is working his ass off on this match, but I think both are. But it is just, again, it's about two of the most 100% effort guys emptying the tank against each other. And like you said, really feeling like you're getting absolutely everything from these two on this night. This is the biggest match they could possibly give to you on this night. Beyond the effort, though, I thought that, there are other reasons I like this match. I think the first thing is there's just this fun novelty to watching these guys run through a large portion of what they do against each other. Like, yes, we had seen these guys wrestle each other before, but we hadn't seen the 2006 era return Briscoes that have added on some muscle and have more confidence and some new offense wrestle each other before. And kind of going to what you said about like they did so much against each other. To me, this match was kind of like the wrestling equivalent of you go see a band and it's a special night where that band decides, on this night we're going to play for 3 hours. We're going to play almost every hit we have. And we're also going to play like 5 deep cuts that we almost never play. Like it was that kind of match, it was that kind of night for these two. And I felt like those deep cuts are also a fun part of making this match fun. Like they didn't just run through the regular stuff. They did stuff where I've either never seen it or rarely seen it. Like that move you mentioned where Jay does a move that looks like the halfway point between like a Steiner screwdriver and a Michinoku driver. I've seen Jay before do the Falcon Arrow, so I was almost like, is this a Falcon Arrow that went wrong? But like whatever it was, it looked really cool. Like I don't know why it was so high angle tonight or why he decided to do something different tonight, but it was really cool. And that spot you mentioned to me where Mark leaps off the crouched referee's back and jumps over the ropes and in midair hooks Jay into the Rana off the apron to the floor. To me, that's clearly the spot of the match. Crowd lost their minds at that. That is just a holy shit. Again, that's another one of those spots where it's like, yeah, maybe Bart Briscoe. Maybe
one day.
That would be great if Bart Briscoe helped run the chicken farm and the chicken farm slogan was "Don't have a cow, man." But I'm pleased with myself at that one. But yeah, it was just, again, they're pulling out spots they would almost never do. And yeah, you love that feeling as a fan, especially when you're a fan that's rewatching every show, when you can recognize, oh, I'm getting the extra special stuff tonight. They're putting out the fancy tablecloth for this meal tonight. I also think, like you were saying, that there's a bit of physicality that separates this from a lot of matches we were seeing in ROH at this time, trading hard shots early, like you were talking about. Even Mark just taking those body slams on the hardwood floor, it just sounded like it sucked to take that. Jay taking the suplex on the ramp, sounded like it sucked to take, just those hard thuds, of guys just really laying their bodies out there. And I even really like that spot you mentioned where late in the match, Jay has Mark in a stretch plum. The ref, is doing the arm check, dropping the arm once and then twice, and it drops twice. And if he's going to lift it up a third time, if it drops, Mark's going to have lost the match. And before the ref can check a third time, Jay releases the stretch plum, picks Mark up, drags him to his feet, and just levels him with a crazy lariat and goes for the cover. And normally I would hate that spot. I would say that's dumb for a wrestler to not wait the extra 1 second to see if a submission maybe was going to work and win the match for them before letting go of it. But the way these guys wrestled the match and the way Jay transitioned so quickly from the stretch plum to the lariat, and the lariat being so hard and emphatic, and the cover was so quick, to me it worked. It kind of fit the vibe of this match and the vibe of the Briscoes being just like, no motherfucker, I'm just gonna knock you unconscious. Like I'm not gonna let you go out that easily.
Also, you could say they know each other so well. So Jay realized like, oh, this isn't gonna be it. So I'm gonna do one other crazy thing instead of letting him do this stupid arm up thing. Like it's almost like it's because it's his brother that he could get away with doing that spot.
Yeah, and it works great. And I like the ending too. Like sometimes when a match goes to a double knockout like this, it comes out of nowhere and it's a bit anticlimactic, I find. I like that they foreshadowed it. They saved their big spots for the end, and they had 2 or 3 times before the finish where both guys were down together for nearly a 10 count. So when the finish comes, it wasn't a double KO spot that felt random out of nowhere. It felt like both guys were very evenly matched. They were running on fumes, and it's almost like, because this match almost ended in a double KO multiple times before the finish, it almost felt like this was like an eventuality. Like, these guys, it was meant to end this way. They were dying against each other here. And the one flaw I had, and I think you kind of touched on it, was I think the finish, the one flaw to this finish is, like you said, Jay hits the J driller. They're both too exhausted to get up. and but they both make it out right before the 10 count, and then Mark hits the cutthroat driver, and this time Mark's the one too exhausted to make a pin, and then they stay down for the 10 count. Like you, I had the same thought as you, which was, doesn't that kind of make Mark look stronger? And to me, I would have liked the symmetry of Jay hits the J driller, they get up at 9. Mark hits the cutthroat driver, they get up at 9, and then they hit maybe one more move to each other at the same time, and then they stay down at 10.
Remember, the second double down was after they just punched each other for a while, so that could have been the finish, right? They could have just reversed the order of the cutthroat driver and made that the finish. I mean, I don't think it's a big deal, but I guess if you want to be really particular about it, they could have done that.
Yeah, like, again, it's a minor flaw, but I do think it would have been neat, just because, especially because the story of this match so much is about how they're completely evenly matched. I think making the finish as even Steven as possible, because I noticed the same thing you did. I would have wanted to make it even more even.
Maybe they wanted to give that subtle advantage to Mark. That could have been it too.
So yeah, I think one of the best compliments you can give this match is that 27 minutes. And knowing the history of ROH and indie wrestling in general, that would over time with matches, we'd see more and more matches that tried to do too much, where they were too ambitious, they missed the crowd peak. There's a ton of matches in the future of indie wrestling where it's a 25-minute match that if it ended at 10 minutes when the crowd was molten, it would have been amazing. But then they did 5 extra minutes of near falls and the crowd gets quieter as they go on. This is not a match like this. You might think that on paper. My memory was it isn't. This is 27 minutes. They end with the most exciting spots of the match. The crowd is louder in those final minutes than they are at any other point in the match. It feels like they've hit a new gear in the final minutes of the match. And this is a 27-minute match that did not miss its peak. It ends right at its peak. So to me, that's a huge credit to them that they went that long and they still peaked it at the end, and they never lost the crowd.
Yeah, I would say this is definitely on the short list of best matches of ROH for 2007 so far. This, along with Joe Morishima and the Briscoes against Steen and Generico, and the Briscoes against Doi and Shingo. This honestly, this might be my favorite so far of the year. This was I thought this was a pretty special match, I think.
Yeah, I agree. This was a great match, and I still think I prefer the 2002 match from Honor Invades Boston, just because I love the story and the psychology and the selling of that match so much, and it's so unique in that sense for its era. But I can see why a lot of people would prefer this, and it's another great match that's close to that in quality, and it's completely different. And
yeah, like I said, every era of the Briscoes is going to give you a different version of the way these two guys match up, and that was perfect for that era, and I think this is perfect for this era.
And I love the fact that this, I haven't had many of these on through the years where this is a match where it's significantly better than my memory was of it, because I don't remember it liking it this much. And the flaws I remembered it having, it doesn't, at least to me in my 2025, the way I see wrestling now. And I feel like I'm more sensitive to that stuff today. And I didn't see any of that. It's a match that somehow defies those kind of flaws we kind of talked about. I feel like we were both kind of talking about you'd think that it would feel this way, but it doesn't. And it's kind of a way to sum up this match. One note I want to mention is Dave Prazak on commentary at one point when he's talking about this match as it's happening says, "Who's a tougher competitor than your own brother?" And I would say, depending on your family, quite possibly tons of people. I would argue that sometimes in serious things in my life, my 2 half brothers would not consider me their toughest competitor. It depends. That was a very weird it's one of those statements where your gut instinct when you first hear it for the first half second is yeah, that's true. And then when you think about it for even a second, you're like, that's not true at all.
Makes me want to see a Prazak versus Prazak match. I don't know if Jay Prazak has brothers, but if he does, let's get him in the ring. GCW, you've booked weirder matches than this.
And there were other little bits of psychology I liked in this match too. There's the very simple psychology of Jay. Mark kept trying to do springboard moves, and early on Jay blocks or counters 2 or 3 of them, and then later when Mark finally does hit one, he then hits a couple of them. Like you get this feeling of like, okay, he got denied and now he's going to break them out. Like he does that really cool springboard splash where he rotates 360 degrees in the air. So again, there are little bits of, I'm not going to claim this is like a high art classic of where, oh, there's such deep layered psychology, but I do think we both agree there's a bit more depth than you would think that this match has.
Yeah, for sure.
Or to this match than you would think it has. But at the finish, like you mentioned, I thought this was another, I'm really glad you pointed out, the crowd boos, and then it's, normally when crowds, when I don't know if I've ever seen a finish like this, where normally when a match goes to a draw, if it's a match the crowd likes, they boo, and then you get the 5 more minute chance. And like you said, they boo for like 1 second, and it's like they realize that match was so good, like we can't complain.
And also, I think they realize, like, wait, why do we even need a winner? We don't give a shit who won.
So yeah, they almost immediately after a very short boo quickly launch into applause, and they even applaud again. I can't remember ever seeing this. Bobby Cruz, when he announces a draw, they applaud that too. Like they've quickly come to appreciate that it ended that way. They do a super loud that was awesome chant. Both Briscoes sell for a long time as the crowd chants, "Thank you, Briscoes." Todd Sinclair pours water on them, so they're really selling the exhaustion of this. Very big standing ovation from the crowd as both Briscoes rise to their feet. Then the Briscoes fist bump, they embrace, and them boys are back on their road to glory. Like they're just back as a team, and it. Great match. Great, like you mentioned, a few matches, great crowd reactions. This is the match I think more than any other. Main event has some really great crowd reactions too, but like just great crowd reactions. We then go to Nigel McGuinness backstage, cutting yet another 2007 ROH promo where the wrestler has been told to really look off to the side. I know, Matt, you said your memories. This does eventually end. I know you're right. At this point, it feels like it's never going to end. Nigel says last night he came up short again like he did last August against Danielson in the UK. Tonight, he says, is not about getting that respect from the fans because he thinks he already got it from them last night when he had to battle through a pulled groin against Samoa Joe just to finish that match. He says tonight is about repaying that respect to the fans. He's going to kick Jimmy Rave's ass. And he's going to get that big win in Liverpool. So what they're doing in this promo on the commentary later is they're trying to sell this idea that like this is now the third show ROH just ran in Liverpool. Nigel's had big, high-profile losses in both his matches. So tonight, his big win is basically going to be getting any kind of win in Liverpool. So, and we move on to the Ring of Honor World Tag Title match. Naruki Doi and Shingo successfully defend their newly won titles, defeating the No Remorse Corps of Davey Richards and Roderick Strong in 19 minutes, 34 seconds when Doi pinned Richards after hitting a super Doi 5s off the second turnbuckle. If there's one word to describe this match, I would say it's energy. ROH is running in the same building they did the night before, where I imagine a lot of those same fans saw the Dragon Gate team win the tag titles in a big upset and a great match. And so they're really pumped for them now. They were into them last night, but it feels like they're even more pumped for them tonight. And that enthusiasm I felt was really contagious among the wrestlers. Like Doi and Shingo seemed to really be vibing and feeding off the energy right from the start. Like I felt like in particular Shingo has always emoted during this ROH run, but I felt like on this match, on this night, it was a whole other level. He is so expressive and charismatic. It's like almost hammy at a couple points, but it's great. Like he literally at one point does Hulk Hogan's entire posing routine, complete with ear cupping. At one point, he sneaks in the ring as the illegal man to attack someone and break up a move or a hold. But before he does it, he does this big pantomime shh to the crowd to be quiet before. Like he's just going over the top here. And there's just this feeling you get when someone is super keyed in. And I think more than any other match on this ROH run, Shingo, for whatever reason on this night, decided, like, I'm just going to go all out. And Doi was right there with him. I thought it was kind of surprising. Roddy and Davey almost take a back seat to the Dragon Gate guys here. They certainly get some offense in, but this really feels like Shingo and Doi's match, that they're controlling more of the offense, that they're like the stars on this night of this match. The crowd does have a lot of fun at razzing Davey Richards, who in turn at one point in the match, he's getting mad that they're chanting his name at him. And then later on when they're not, he's getting angry that they're not chanting his name, which I think is a great heel thing, to be so hypocritical, like, and never satisfied. Stylistically, this is a fast-paced, do-stuff match. comparing it to the Shingo and Doi Briscoes match we saw the night before, I feel like that one had more of a progression where halfway through it really advanced to a new gear, where this match is basically one fast gear the entire way through. Like it's a matter of, do you prefer a match that maybe starts at a 6 or a 7 and builds to a 9 or 10 by the end, or do you want a match that just starts at an 8.5 and just stays at 8.5 whole way through and just buzzes through it? There's no real storytelling in this match except for a bit of healing from the No Remorse core. Everyone seems to be having so much fun, though. The crowd is clearly super into it. The wrestlers are constantly reacting to the crowd or each other or hitting a spot. Like, it's just, again, so much energy from the wrestlers in this match. It's also really cool in a way that the UK got to see two surprises on this weekend, right? Because obviously the Briscoes losing the tag titles the night before was a big shocker, but I would have to think you would also think at this time that then, like, okay, Dragon Gate guys are going to lose it the next night, especially because Roddy and Davey, they just put them together. It makes sense that you'd give a new stable a tag belt. You know, they're probably, this Dragon Gate team's probably not going to hold the titles for very long, which is true. But they, not only do they lose tonight, again, like, the Japanese team beats them cleanly, kind of emphatically, and yeah, the No Remorse core, even though they're a brand new stable, they lose clean here. And overall, I think the Briscoes tag the night before reached a bit of a higher high, and the reaction to the finish of that night, that real big surprise there, really put over the top for me. But I also think this is a great tag match too. I don't know, you know, it's right there with it. Maybe I prefer the other night a little bit better because of the higher highs, but this is maybe a bit more consistently fun. And I really don't know how much better, just like I said about Pac, I don't know how much better a weekend Doi and Shingo could have had here. Not only, like, they had two great matches in their kind of style. They were super over. And I feel like, I don't know if this is controversial or if you agree, I feel like they kind of outshined their opponents both nights, and they had great opponents. So really tough to do. So I really enjoyed this too.
Yeah, well, I think this was the Dragon Gate style, so of course they're going to, I think, outshine Strong and Richards in this match, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think I thought it was by design. I do think it's kind of funny that they made the Ring of Honor tag team title match have Dragon Gate rules. I feel like that's a little bit contrived, but you know, I obviously it made, you know, the point was to have a great match, and it made for a great match. And this felt like watching Dragon Gate USA a couple years later, you know, and I mean that in a good way. I think that this and the Briscoes match, this is the kind of stuff that, like, I've been saying these ROH shows need, just these action-packed matches where guys are not holding back on these undercards, especially on these bigger ROH shows. And I've been saying, like, just wait till we get to the UK. You're going to see some of these shows that we've been, like, clamoring for, which is just match after match of people giving it everything and just having really exciting matches where they do a lot of big athletic stuff. And I think despite the fact that this match didn't have a ton of psychology, despite the fact that it was paced at kind of one gear the whole time, it was a very high gear, and it was really exciting, and it just made for a lot of really cool moves. And I don't think this is the highest level of Dragon Gate style match that we've seen in ROH, but it was really good one. You know, whenever guys like the Briscoes or Roderick Strong or Davey Richards are in matches like this, you can tell they were really trying to prove something and really trying to show they could do this state-of-the-art style. And obviously they're not as good at it as Shingo Takagi or Naruki Doi are, but they held their own. Definitely the sort of match where there's just too much shit going on to list all the moves. There is one spot that I thought was really cool that you said that Doi and Shingo really stood out, but I think the spot that Richards and Strong did that got a huge reaction was this double team lung blower, as Strong had Doi up in like a full powerbomb position, and Richard jumped all the way up and dropped into a lung blower. The crowd went nuts for that. I thought that was a really, really cool way to finish. The other spot that I thought was cool was when Richards goes for the handspring kick, but Shingo catches him on his shoulders into like a torture rack and drops him in the bloodfall, and then Doi immediately follows that with the running boot. I thought that was really cool. But yeah, there's just too much cool stuff to list. The one kind of ROH quirk I thought was funny. This is the part of one of the matches where they're talking about how they're awaiting word from Tokyo about what happens in the Kenta versus Morishima Budokan main event. But isn't Tokyo like 9 hours ahead of Liverpool? So shouldn't they already have the results? Or are they waiting it on
Or
like is it like old fashioned? Are they waiting for a raven to deliver the news, like in Game of Thrones or something?
they're on the Noah message board waiting for a fan to get home and tell them.
For a crow to come? Yeah, no, I don't know. But yeah, I thought this match was great.
And I think that is what you mentioned about like Davey and Roddick, and it made me think about something where, like, I think those guys and most of their ROH roster, they worked hard every night. But I think another advantage to bringing in big names from Japanese promotions at this time was a lot of wrestlers really wanted to work in Japan, and so in a sense, it's even an extra incentive for the guys who put them against to work extra hard, because in a way, a lot of these matches end up basically being kind of auditions, right? Like, you want to put your best possible impression forward, so those guys go home and tell it their higher ups, like, this guy was great. You should bring him in next to her. And I think that's a great fringe benefit for a promoter at this time, bringing guys in from Japan. So after the match, the crowd chants Dragon Gate while Dave Prazak on commentary, selling what's next for the No Remorse Court, talks about faction warfare is coming to Ring of Honor. And I don't know if this is the first time he said it. I think he might have said it before. But this was the time where I really started thinking, I wonder how much of the fans' eventual hatred of that story came from branding it in such a dorky way. Like, it's probably not a major reason, but I gotta think it's at least like 7% of the reason, because it is such a dorky name and it reminds me of that when Ring of Honor used to do that thing in earlier years where right after someone pinned somebody at the end of a big feud-ending match, they'd have the announcers actually say, so-and-so wins the feud. It's like you're taking something that's supposed to be natural and organic and making it feel so dorky and planned, like faction warfare is coming. It's just, it hasn't even started yet, really. Like, Jack Evans doesn't even have a stable yet.
Clearly they were inspired by the WWF in 1997 having gang wars between the Nation of Domination and the Disciples of Apocalypse and Los Boricuas.
So that brings us to our semi-main event. The fight, or you could even argue first half of a double main event, depending on how big you think Nigel and Liverpool's the significance is. Fight without honor match. Nigel McGuinness defeats Jimmy Rave via pinfall in 20 minutes, 17 seconds after hitting a rebound lariat. Obviously, a big story of this match was it had some things going against it on paper. First one being both guys are coming in hurt. Jimmy Rave had been working a broken jaw for a few shows now, ever since that match with Samoa Joe at Fifth Year Festival Philadelphia, and this is in fact his last match in Ring of Honor for I think roughly 7 weeks. Although it's not his last match, period, because he actually works Roderick Strong in FIP 6 days after this before he takes time off. Meanwhile, Nigel is coming into this not with just that severe groin injury against Samoa Joe, but he suffers. I didn't notice it during the match, but he suffers more injuries. I'll go to The Observer for this. Dave wrote in The Observer. Nigel McGuinness had a rough tour of Europe. It started with him pulling his groin in a match with Samoa Joe. He then injured both his shoulders in the match with Jimmy Rave. He then worked in England, Ireland, and Germany. As soon as he got back to the U.S., he was vomiting and was rushed to the hospital for 3 days with an attack of gastroenteritis. So we are fully in the Nigel McGuinness is just like being Final Destination, constantly getting hurt and sick in horrible ways era of his career, sadly. But Matt, what did you think about this match? The big blow off to the Jimmy Rave Nigel McGuinness feud.
I wonder if those shoulder injuries came from like dropping onto a guardrail a couple times.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? I'm not saying that's where they came from, but wouldn't be shocking. So obviously Nigel's right thigh is wrapped real good from his groin injury, and it's clear that injury is real, so he doesn't really have to sell because he is naturally doing it. Is this the only time that a crowd has ever chanted the Danielson, you're going to get your fucking head kicked in chant for a wrestler a match that did not involve Danielson at all? I can't remember any other times, but I did appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a nice full circle moment because I think Danielson introduced that chant, telling the crowd the first time, like, this is a soccer chant in Europe. And so it was nice the crowd being like, yes, it is a soccer chant, so we don't have to save it for you, Mr. Danielson.
Yeah, for sure. So First of all, let's talk about Jimmy Rave's blade job. I felt really bad for him. That's like one of the worst blade jobs I've ever seen in my life. Like he got nothing from that.
It's a
I
weird blade job because there's like a little blob of blood on his forehead that does not drip down and it's so small it gets covered by his bangs. But it's weird because like a little blood does pull to the surface and then it just stays there and it doesn't do anything. Like it just,
yeah,
that's it.
I would love to see like a video like explaining the nuances of doing a good blade job and like the difference between getting a Whitmer type blade job and a Rave type blade job. Like obviously I know there's the whole taking aspirin and stuff like that, but it's got to be more to it than that, right? Like
I've heard people say take an aspirin and drink a Coke before the match. And I'm like, if Coke thins your blood, then my blood has to, because if Diet Coke counts, my blood has to be thinner than water then because, so I can't see, but I've heard people not just say aspirin, but drink a Coke and aspirin. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know I'd be interested in like you, like what is, obviously there's got to be a cutting technique too, but there's
right.
probably something about like taking a certain number of hours before the match and whatever.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, also a lot of it depends on probably just everyone's blood is a little different.
Yeah.
But and I'm trying to think back if are there other matches where Rave has bladed. I feel like there probably has to have been, but I can't think of them off the top of my head. Like I don't know.
It must be a cutting thing. Oh,
yeah. I was gonna say I don't know if he bladed in the cage match with Punk. There's definitely no memorable Jimmy Rave blade job that I could think of.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it must be a cutting technique thing too, right? Because I feel like when we do see bad blade jobs, a higher percentage of the time it is people that hardly ever blade. So it must also be just a thing of you must have to get comfortable with the idea of cutting yourself and know like a certain way to do it to get maximum blood.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like there's someone like CM Punk pretty much always gets a good color when he blades. Obviously, we've talked about that a lot. Clearly, Whitmer does, and so yeah. I mean, I guess that's part of an experience too.
We've seen wrestlers who like if they don't get a good blade job at first. I've seen wrestlers, I'm sure you have too, who will like clearly find another spot to recut themselves. Like there are wrestlers that will be like, if I'm not bleeding good, I'll just keep cutting until I get there. So
I've even seen the pretty famous match, the 3 Stages of Hell match between Triple H and Stone Cold Steve Austin at No Way Out 2001, where like Triple H blades during that match. But then if you look closely after the match, when they're both like laying on the mat, like selling the defeat, he blades again, like post-match blade job. Like, so I think that's some dedication to blading.
Yeah.
Which is just amazing to think about. That's WWE, which is like, obviously it's been years since they made blading a standard part of their presentation. But anyway, as far as this match, I think I think early in the match, the crowd's a bit tired, so they're not as hot for it as you might think. They're still interested and they do stuff on the floor. And I do appreciate that very early on, Nigel pulls out a chair from under the ring and, the crowd just cheers so much for just a chair, because, it shows that they're the feud is over enough that they want to see a chair shot, but also I realize it's novel to have seen that kind of folding chair on this show because the chairs around ringside were the fancier, sturdier chairs. So the crowd is excited to see the kinds of folding chairs we watch on DVD or on TV.
That might have been the only folding chair in the building was the one he brought from under the ring. They probably brought it special. For that match.
Exactly. There was a pretty clever spot where Nigel gets into the ring with the chair hanging at his side. So Rave does a surprise dropkick into the chair, which knocks right into Nigel's wrap leg. I thought that was pretty clever how they did that, and that allows Rave to take some control. I also like that they teased doing the unified ring post headbutt spot, but Nigel blocked it and rammed Rave's shoulder into the post. And then, of course, the big I guess a special guest star of this match was instead of pulling out a ladder or any sort of barbed wire board from under the ring, Nigel pulls out a section of ring post. Excuse me, not ring post. That'd be weird. A section of guardrail from under the ring. And he starts using that as a weapon, and that becomes, one of the stars of the match. And I thought that was cool. It was unique. I don't think I've ever seen a match where that was the major weapon. Can you think of another match like that?
No. It is interesting that I was going to say this later, but like it's interesting that it's a big fight without honor, and we've seen matches lately like the Jimmy Jacobs Colt match where like it's a big like gimmick and feud-ending gimmick match. Let's use like a ton of different props. This match goes in a different direction where it's like we're just going to use two things, but we're going to use them a fair bit and like in good ways. But it's like I was almost kind of surprised, like all they use is the guardrail and the chair. That's it.
Yeah, and they use them very effectively. Nigel bridges the the guardrail like between the apron of the ring and the actual guardrail, and flapjacks Rave on it, which it dents it very early on. Then he slingshots Rave up into it, and that's where Rave does his very unfortunately bad blade job. That is pretty much a non-factor in the match. And then they get back in the ring, and Rave hits a swinging neckbreaker, and Nigel sells his groin, which is like, man, I bet you that was barely even selling at that point. Like, that seems like it must have hurt real bad. So Nigel, when he does make a comeback, it's plagued by pretty legitimate limping. That's when Nigel starts hitting lariats for 2 counts. Rave blocks Tower of London, hits a missile dropkick, but Nigel quickly recovers and hits the Tower of London and gets the 2 count. And that's when I noticed the guardrail is still propped up, so I'm like, all right, well, they're not done with this guardrail yet. At one point, Nigel blocks Rave's springboard swinging DDT by putting him over the ropes and then hitting that rope straddle lariat, so I thought that was a pretty clever way of getting to that position. And then they end up back on the apron, and Nigel tries to suplex Rave on the guardrail, but Rave blocks it, STOs Nigel onto the guardrail. And if that didn't hurt Nigel's shoulders, well, I don't know how. But it bends the guardrail basically entirely in half. And it is a pretty cool spot that, though it doesn't quite bring the crowd to a peak just yet, but the crowd does pop pretty good for Nigel's kick out. And then Rave kicks Nigel, charges at him, but Nigel backdrops him over the top onto the already broken guardrail. And the crowd does go insane for that one. Like, because I think they just thought it was done now. Like, they thought, okay, that guardrail has been destroyed. We are not seeing any more of that guardrail. But we did, and it was crazy. And we get a "You Killed Jimmy" chant. And then Nigel continues to use the now totally curved guardrail. He props it back up, hits a Tower of London onto an open folding chair, which I think gets the biggest pop of the match, and a huge Nigel chant, but Rave kicks out. I don't really get why the crowd was so shocked, but they were. And then Nigel just propped up the guardrail, so like I would think that they should have figured out that the match was not going to end until Nigel used that guardrail again. But they didn't. So at that point, Nigel goes for a short arm lariat, but Rave ducks, drops down, and locks in the heel hook, which is, I thought, an extremely cool transition into that move. Nigel makes the ropes, but Rave does not release it since it's a fight without honor. So Nigel pulls himself up by the ropes and escapes by knocking Rave into the ref. Then Nigel grabs Rave, Tower of London's him onto the propped up guardrail, which means Nigel has to take another back bump onto the guardrail, which is fucking insane. We get a "This is awesome" chant. Nigel covers, but the ref is down, so Sinclair runs out and kicks out. And then we see that the first ref is bleeding. I don't know if that was like a shoot, broken nose, but it kind of looked like it. He was definitely bleeding more than Rave was. And then Nigel and Rave get up, they exchange slaps. Rave spits at Nigel, spears him into the rebound lariat, and Nigel gets the pin. Huge pop. I thought the first 2/3 of the match were good. Maybe slower and less violent than you'd want from a fight without honor. And, obviously Rave's blade job we talked about. But those last 7 or 8 minutes were fucking awesome, I thought. Like, the crowd was going insane. Those spots were on the guardrail were out of control. The Tower of London on the chair was great. The ending was great. I just thought, like, I thought it ended up being a great match because I thought the peak was so good. I think if they maybe had more violence throughout and that blade job connected better, this could have been a classic. I don't think it's quite a classic, but I really thought that finish was really good. I think elevated this match to a level that I would consider a great level, like maybe, a 4-star match, I would say, by the end.
So I said this match had a couple things working against it. The first thing being that both these guys came in with pretty significant injuries. But I would say the other thing working against it is that it's a fight without honor. It's a big, crazy, no rules gimmick match, which I'm not against for this match because it's a feud ending match. They had a bunch of matches. You kind of do need to blow it off with like something extra stipulation, but it's a promotion where just a couple shows ago we saw Jimmy Jacobs and Colt Cabana have a street fight where they used every piece of plunder in the world and had probably one of the top 5, maybe even top 3 bloodiest matches in the history of the company up to that point. We had just seen Jacobs and Whitmer earlier this night in a match that went crazy and did all sorts of crazy shit and had a big time blade job. And this match is affected by some of those limitations. Like Nigel, he comes in with his upper thigh all taped up, so he's clearly still hurting from the groin injury. And it felt like the night before when he got hurt in the middle of the match against Joe, when Nigel hurt his groin, it felt like he just decided, maybe with adrenaline, just to gut through and do what he normally does, swearing as he does it. But this match seems more designed to protect Nigel physically a bit. He does a couple moves that require him to run around, but like he's not doing many. And like the night before, he's limping when he does. And this is just a match where he's not moving around a ton, I noticed. He takes the time to work the crowd a bit more between stuff. And apart from the STOs on the barricade, I felt like Jimmy took most of the biggest bumps in this match. And in fact, I think Jimmy has said in like an interview that he's really proud of this match, but, it was also a tough match because they both came in hurt, and because Nigel was so hurt with the groin, like he really had to like bump for the, he had to kind of make up for some of the physical limitations of this match maybe. But this is, like I said before, this is not a match where you see a million props. You see 2, but mostly really you just see 1. You just see the barricade other than the chair for 1 or 2 spots. But they're used really well. And also, like we mentioned, this is not a bloody match because Jimmy blades, and it's one of the worst blade jobs in Ring of Honor history, which I felt bad for. We've talked about a bunch already. But also, I will say, like you said, the ref bumps later in the match, and then they cut to him, and he's bleeding really bad from either the nose or mouth, to the point where I, like you, think that might be legitimate. Because I was like, why would he blade 1 from, like, not his forehead, and 2, so severely for a pretty standard ref bump that doesn't have giant implications. And all I could think of was, like, if I'm Jimmy Rave at that point, if I see him bleeding, I'm probably thinking, fuck, like, the only thing worse than cutting a bad blade job is if the ref in your match cuts a bit, like, bleeds more than you. Like, I'd be so annoyed. I'd be like, come on, man, just don't show that to anybody. But, with all that said, I thought these guys made those limitations work. Jimmy is good at match structure, and a bunch of beats in this match I felt like made a lot of sense. There are some changes of momentum in this match that are based around key moments, like you mentioned, where Jimmy tries to ram Nigel's head into the ring post the way Danielson did in Liverpool the year before. And I love he does this great grin, and the crowd had been chanting earlier, like, die, Jimmy, die. And almost like a movie supervillain, Jimmy turns to the crowd, he goes, guess who's gonna die now? And then, of course, Nigel blocks it and fires up and takes control of the match. And you mentioned the spot. You got the spot where Nigel grabs the folding chair from under the ring, and he really plays to the crowd, which gives Jimmy the time to recover and hit the chair into Nigel, which gives Nigel a chance to sell his groin again and Jimmy to get control again. So I felt like they had found a couple nice moments to make, like, real big moments to change momentum in the match. But there were also a couple head scratchers to me. Like, first off, I don't get why they had that late ref bump in the match, because this is a no DQ match, so no one interferes in the match. And when Nigel goes for a cover after the ref bump, the replacement ref is in the ring so quickly that the cover was maybe only like half to 1 second slow. So, like, there's not even like a visual pinfall where, oh, someone would have won if the ref had been there earlier. And so I was like, for the life of me, I don't know why they did a ref bump in this match.
Maybe Sinclair was there faster than he was supposed to be.
Yeah, I have no idea. And the other little logic quibble I have in this match is that late in the match, Nigel makes special effort to reset up the barricade on the floor that multiple bumps have already happened on. You mentioned this. And in fact, like, at this point, the barricade has already been bent into an L shape. It's been so warped. And Nigel carefully sets it up again at ringside and then goes in the ring, and he does a spot that has nothing to do with the barricade. He just carefully propped up on the floor. And it doesn't make sense in kayfabe. It only makes sense by the fact that they're knowing that they're planning to do another spot later on that involves the barricade and it has to be set up now because it's the spot where Jimmy Rave gets backdropped over the top rope onto the barricade. And like you said, like you were kind of shocked, like shouldn't the fans realize if a guy goes to that trouble setting something up that the match is not going to end until they use that again. And I agree with you, but yet, yeah, it's for some reason it seemed like they weren't. So, with that said, to me, that Jimmy Rave barricade bump, that was the bump of the match. Like he took that like no hesitation at all. He didn't seem to land completely flat on the barricade, which seemed like it made it even worse. It was just like, I can't recall Jimmy Rave taking a bump that wild, and really this match is like, it's Jimmy Rave bumping in a way he rarely is called to bump for, and he rises to the occasion. This match has 61 votes on Cage Match the last time I checked a few days ago, and sitting at an average rating of 9 out of 10, which translates to 4.5 stars. And I've got to say, like, I don't see it at that level. Like you, I feel like a lot of this match is good, but to me, just that good, and then it really picks up at the end. I completely agree with you on that. A lot of the body of the match is a little slower. It's Nigel gutting through and hitting a lot of his usual spots a little slower because he is going through a legitimate injury, and it has a couple of those nice match transitions. But then the two things I felt like that elevated it were the big bumps and Jimmy Rave's performance. Like the barricade spots, all those spots that they did with it looked good. Especially that Jimmy Rave backdrop bump onto it. I thought the Tower of London onto the open chair looked awesome. And I even felt like Jimmy's final bump of the match that he took on the final rebound lariat where he almost lands on the back of his head. Like, again, Jimmy doesn't usually take spots. Like, he's not a Matt Sydal kind of, I'm going to take a spot every match where I'm going to flip for you and land nearly on my head kind of guy. Like, he's just going out of his way for a special match. And I felt like watching this match, you're really seeing Nigel gritting his teeth and grinding through an injury, and you're seeing Jimmy go the extra mile to help compensate for that. And he even pulls out like one of the best running knees I've seen from Jimmy, and he does a nice missile drop kick too. And again, you're not seeing many missile drop kicks from Jimmy Rave on this heel run in Ring of Honor. So overall, like you, I'm very close to your rating on this. I would call this on the border of very good to great, like that line between 3 3/4 to 4 stars. I think the crowd getting into it by the end helps a lot too. They're into it to some degree all the way through, but by that end, they've gotten them molten back up for it. Not everything went these guys' way going into the match or even during the match, like with the blade job, but I feel like they had just enough of the big memorable spots you'd want from a feud-ending gimmick match, and the work was good, and the atmosphere sealed the deal. Like I guess the way I'd summarize, I would say, like, I think without those big, kind of like what you were saying, I think without those big spots on the guardrail and the chair, this match is good but slightly disappointing. But this match had those big spots on the guardrail and chair; those are part of the match, so they were awesome, and so that raises this match up. So one other interesting thing coming away from this, I don't know when people figured this out or when it was disclosed, but we'll go to the Torch first. PW Torch wrote, Jimmy Rave was diagnosed with a broken mandible on the lower right side of his jaw in the fight without honor against Nigel McGuinness on March 4th. He wrestled for FIP the following Saturday with the broken jaw. Rave now has his jaw wired shut and will be out 8 to 12 weeks. It turns out he's out like 7. And the Observer wrote, Jimmy Rave suffered a broken jaw on March 4th against Nigel McGuinness, is out 2 to 3 months. So first off, classic wrestlers coming back on like the short end of the timeline always, but also people at this time, like the major publications thought, and that was the word Ring of Honor was putting out, was, Jimmy broke his jaw in the Nigel match, to the point where they rename the Nigel rebound lariat the Jawbreaker Lariat. But actually, as we've gone into, Jimmy Rave actually has gone on the record and said he broke his jaw in the match against Joe, and they basically kept it quiet.
Yeah, well, clearly his mouth wasn't wired shut during that promo.
No. So yeah, it is interesting that, you see the wrestling logic of it, which is Joe's leaving. They're not going into a feud. So there's nothing to be gained from telling the truth. And if anything, it gives sympathy for Jimmy going into this match, like, he's coming into it with an injury of his own. So it makes sense. But it is interesting that, like, it's one of those examples of the wrestling newsletters who are more easily worked on the indie stuff because they're not going to spend hours and hours with a dozen sources going through the stuff, but they just took what they were told at face value. Like, oh yeah, Jimmy Rave broke his jaw against Nigel. It's like, no, he didn't actually. Immediately after the match, the crowd gives a big round of applause, a huge ROH chant. One of the bigger crowd reactions, I would say, of the weekend so far comes after this match is done. It turns to big chants for Nigel, who I felt like left shockingly quickly after. Like, he does pose at the entranceway, but I felt for like what was supposed to be his big moment and the semi-main event, he didn't milk this moment for very long at all. Like, did you notice that? Like, he's not – they're done after this match pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what time it was, live in the building. Maybe that had something to do with it. They knew there was going to be a pretty long segment for Joe and he didn't want to take the spotlight off of him there. Or maybe he was just like feeling in pain and was like, I got to get to the back and rest. That's certainly possible too. Especially if he just injured both of his shoulders as well between all of his other injuries.
We then get a fifth-year festival video highlighting the world title over the last year. Lots of great Bryan Danielson clips. Bryan Danielson, still good at wrestling. And it then, of course, ends with Homicide beating Danielson for the title. And then they do a surprisingly neat for ROH video production moment where there are a ton of cool moments in ROH history in video form that are being contained in these little balls. And then all the balls seemingly get absorbed into the title as it's being held by Morishima. And I was like, for Ring of Honor standards, I was like, that's pretty extra for Ring of Honor video production standards. So I was like, good on you guys. But that brings us to the main event, and it is Samoa Joe defeating Homicide, scored to the ring by Julius Smokes, via pinfall in 23 minutes, 1 second after he hit a muscle buster off the second turnbuckle. For Joe's entrance, his music cuts between the three different themes he used in Ring of Honor, which kind of is jarring to listen to, but I appreciate the significance of doing that, trying to represent all three eras of his career in the company. And the camera does a neat thing too, where they shoot this where the first thing we see of Joe is the cameraman is standing right behind Joe, basically shooting him from behind over his shoulder, and they're behind the curtain, and we can hear the crowd, through the curtain, and then the cameraman basically follows Joe from behind as he walks through the curtain to make his entrance, which again I thought was a cool, unique camera move. There was a couple of those on this show. Crowd reaction is huge. There are multiple thank you Joe chants, and we also get a new chant of he's a legend. This is not Joe's final match ever in Ring of Honor. This is not even necessarily the last Joe match we'll cover on Through the Years, because he does work a match against Tyler Black late in 2008. We may very well get that far if the world exists, if we don't get tired of this. But Joe would later do a very short little run between TNA and NXT in Ring of Honor. And of course, he'd return again years after that for Tony Khan's Ring of Honor. But what this match is the end of an era. Let's be honest. Like, this is the last time Joe wrestles in Gabe Sapolsky's ROH. It's the final match of this original Ring of Honor run of his. And I think you have to say, I think anyone that's watched all of Joe's career or most of it, I think you'd be hard pressed to say that this is not in many ways his career defining run and his best run anywhere. And it's not the run that was seen by the most eyeballs, as I imagine the TNA, NXT, WWE, AEW runs. I bet you have all were seen by more people, but it's the run that really brought his name to a new level, put him on the wrestling map. Creatively, I think to this day, it's the best one he ever had, like I said. And I think it's one of the best, I'll go as far as to say, I think it's one of the best runs in any single promotion any wrestler has had in the last 25 years. And there are a lot of types of farewell matches. There are ones with big, heavy energy where there's like something big at stake. It's really a heavy weight over the whole match. Maybe the match has like a step where the wrestler only retires if he loses. Maybe a title is on the line. Maybe it's the end of a big feud or a first-time dream match. All these kind of matches where there are high stakes to it, and this match doesn't have that energy. Like Joe is not.
ROH tends to go the other way when it comes to the farewell matches, for sure.
Yeah, Joe is not retiring from all of wrestling. He's just leaving Ring of Honor. And I believe not on this night, but at least on one other show, and I know at least in one of the wrestling newsletters, the word was that Joe's not even leaving, period. Like, he might still come back for an occasional match here or there. In fact, the Observer wrote after this show, I'll quote, Dave Meltzer wrote, Joe's final match of the farewell tour will be against Homicide. There will likely be occasions such as big shows or mystery partner deals where Joe will come back for one shot. So that sense, like fans probably at this time might have even thought like Joe might be back, occasionally. This might not be the end of an era. But now obviously that didn't really end up happening, but we didn't know that at the time. And there's also the fact that Joe is wrestling Homicide, and that's a good choice in my opinion. Like commentary points out that Joe handpicked Homicide. Joe and Homicide had one of Ring of Honor's great rivalries. They had come full circle in storyline over the last year to the point where they were now friends and sometimes tag partners. But one side effect of all that is these two guys have wrestled each other a million times in Ring of Honor. In fact, they had wrestled in Ring of Honor a little over a month before this. So there's like no mystery to a match between these two guys. And then there's the setting. And I have to say, I don't know if you feel this way, Matt. I have to say, I hate that Samoa Joe's last match on this Ring of Honor run was in the UK. And that is nothing against the UK because, let's be clear, the UK was great to Ring of Honor. Kerry Silken has said that at one point, 20 to 25% of ROH's DVD sales were coming from the UK. They were briefly on TV there with the short-lived wrestling channel in the UK. The fans for the show we've mentioned multiple times in the Olympia. They were great on this show. They were great the night before. They were great in the UK the year before. They turned out numbers that put each of these shows not far off from some of ROH's all-time record crowds at this point. They were loud. They knew the wrestlers. They knew the angles. They knew their stuff. They were great, and I think it's an incredible shame that ROH never in this era would come back to the UK. And I have no idea what the financial outlook is when you factor in all the expenses of overseas plane tickets and other stuff. But the UK, other than maybe a financial consideration, they deserved more shows in the UK. But that being said, as someone who wants to get the sentimental in his old age, it just feels wrong that Joe's last match in ROH is in a country ROH has only run 4 times in its history, if you don't count other promotions' weird kind of co-promoted shows. And I would have loved Joe's final match to be in Philadelphia, because then you would have had that great symmetry of that's where Ring of Honor and Joe's career in Ring of Honor began. That's where Joe won the world title. You could have run it in New York even, because at that point that was ROH's top market. That's where Joe versus Kobashi happened. I will say, I do think this was a better setting for Joe's last match than running in a sports complex in Chicago 2 shows ago, where whistles were constantly blowing because there was a volleyball tournament happening in the next building over. I do think this was a better setting than that. The Olympia is an infinitely better setting in that sense. So before I get to the thoughts of the match, I just want to ask you first, Matt, like, do you remember what your thoughts were like going into this match? Like, did you have any feelings about Joe leaving ROH? Like, were you kind of nervous about like, oh, what's Ring of Honor going to be without him? Like, or any of that kind of stuff? Like, do you have any memories of this?
Yeah, I will say that I was not nervous at all. Not that I like wanted Joe to leave, but I did feel like he, as amazing a run as he had, it had run its course. You know, we've talked about it a lot, right? His most important work was not being done there anymore. And I thought it was reasonable for him to go to put his efforts into the promotion that was paying him the most and that was presenting him to the most people. I thought he had given so much to ROH and to the fans. He clearly, I mean, we'll talk about it as we go over the match, clearly loves ROH so much. You know, I mean, I don't think it was very even transparent how much of a higher esteem he held it in than even TNA at this point in terms of in his heart. You know what I mean? But I did not think ROH needed him, and I did not think that there was any danger that like ROH wouldn't be able to draw without him. We talked about the late 2006 a lot. We both thought things were getting really stale and they needed to freshen things up. And we know that one of the best ways to freshen things up in ROH is for the older acts to leave. And so I thought of it as an opportunity for both Joe and for ROH. I was happy to reminisce about the legacy and about the run, but I wasn't worried in any way. And as far as like, did I have feelings about the last match being in the UK? You know, maybe a little bit. I wasn't upset about it. I was like, I mean, that's not optically the most emotional way to do it, but I understood. Would it have been great if his last show was in like Philly instead? Sure. Obviously the ROH didn't run his hometown the way it did for CM Punk, but I thought it was, I understood. I also really liked that they did the 50th year festival as a dedication to him. I thought that was a good way to go out, that he gets an extra special farewell run more than anyone else got.
Yeah.
I think that was really fitting.
He doesn't get a show; he gets a tour, which they then repeat
Yeah.
with the final countdown tour.
Which
If
is
you're the really big legend, you get a bunch.
exactly.
So yeah, I think that's really good framing of things. We'll probably talk into when we kind of sum up Joe's career afterwards a little bit. But yeah, so going into the match, I said all the stuff the preamble I went to with all that stuff. I thought this match was going to have, based on all the things I talked about, was going to have a very different kind of final match energy, which is the energy you kind of said, Ring of Honor, maybe goes to more often, which is the kind of unserious, this is just a victory lap for someone, and they're kind of more, it's more like a match, I'm just going to enjoy it, but it's going to be more low stakes. Like, I think the best example of that would probably be like the Punk versus Cabana match at Punk the Final Chapter, right? Like, it's a match where they're not trying to have a classic, they're having fun. It's like the idea, like, we're just going to do this one more time. The big emotional story ended the night before.
And very similar to the Cabana farewell match too, that we have a month and a half later, where he just wrestles Adam Pearce in a fairly low stakes match.
Yeah. So we do see bits of that lighter energy here. Like early on, Joe and Homicide are still playing the roles of new friends here. They do this cool secret friend handshake before the match starts. And then early on, Joe bails to the outside of the ring and he walks to there's a bar in the back of the building and he gets a beer. Homicide gets on the house mic and is like, Joe, what are you doing? Like, this is another match where, like, just like Delirious playing the straight man. Now Homicide's playing the straight man. Like, Joe, what are you doing? Take this seriously. But then he remarks, if you had some weed, I'd do that. Which, a few years too early for that, my friend. But then they get to wrestling though, and I can't quite nail down this match because I felt like they worked pretty hard actually once they finally got to wrestling. Do I feel like they were trying to break out every stop and have an all-time classic on Joe's final show? No, like there are parts of this match that definitely have the feel of them playing the hits the way some of Joe's late era Ring of Honor matches do. Is there a short period in the middle of this match starting where Joe does a rolling cradle where Joe seems fucking exhausted, if only for a couple minutes? I noticed that, but at the same time, I thought they worked really hard, and I thought they did break out a few things that kind of surprised me because this is another match where my memory of this match was lower than what I found it to be on rewatch. Like, I not just my memory on this case, some of the reviews I saw after I made my own notes and review and thoughts of this match, I looked up some of the reviews to see what other people thought. And some of the thoughts were kind of what my memory of this match was before rewatch, which is, oh, this was fine. It was more about the moment than the match. This is like a 3-star flat match. And I think it's better than that. We'll get into how good I think it is. But for one, Joe takes a bunch of bumps you don't often see from him. He takes a superplex. He takes a pile driver from Homicide. He gets DDT'd off the second turnbuckle. Like, he's letting Homicide hit him with everything. Joe also does some very minor but fun little wrinkles that you don't see often from him. Like, he does a very nice bridging double arm suplex, which I thought was really cool from him. He does, instead of the usual power bomb into the STF, he holds Homicide, and after the first powerbomb and herks him up and hits a second before he does the STF. So just like he's going the extra mile on a couple spots like that. And then there's this amazing spot near the end. One other idea this match plays with is like, yes, Homicide and Joe are friends now, but Homicide and Smokes are going to do everything they can to win this match. Homicide even says early on, like, I'm going to be the bad guy tonight. Smokes interferes a ton in this match. He grabs Joe's leg when Joe is climbing the turnbuckles at one point. He drags Joe out of the ring when Joe covers Homicide after he hits the first muscle buster of the match. Homicide at one point hits Joe with a ring bell behind the ref's back. But the Smoke stuff is all in front of the ref, including Joe slamming Smokes off the top turnbuckle into the ring. Like, a ref can't ignore that. And normally I would dislike someone interfering in full view of the ref and the ref not calling for a DQ. I've complained about on this show before when it's happened. But I can accept it on this night because it's Joe's final match. The referee doesn't want to end a match this momentous like that on a DQ. And it leads to this amazing spot where Joe gets dragged out of the ring by Smokes at one point. He attacks Smokes and then hits him with an Olay kick, and Smokes sells it as only Julius Smokes could, or maybe Terry Funk. He's going into convulsions, over the top craziness. And then he sets Smokes up for a second Olay kick. And as Joe's in mid stride, Homicide hits him out of nowhere, and the camera has hidden it so you don't really see it with a fucking, well, I think eventually they do kind of show that he's doing it, but like Homicide hits him out of nowhere with the best tope, one of the best tope con helos he's ever hit. Like, you can hear a literal smack when their bodies collide if you listen closely, and the momentum he has is so high, he then basically bounces off Joe's body into the first or second row of the crowd. And we've seen Homicide tope con helos where they're almost always great, but there are ones where he hits the guy solidly and then stays on the floor, and there are ones where he comes so fast and so high that he either barely touches his opponent or overshoots them, and either way he ends up in the crowd. This one, you had like everything. He hit Joe really solidly, and he was still going so fast that he ended up in the second row. And I love the finish. I love Joe doing the muscle buster off the second turnbuckle to reference the finish of their match at Do or Die, which is, now that we've rewatched all their matches in Ring of Honor, I think I can now definitively say that match at Do or Die is still easily the best match these two ever had against each other. I love the announcers even called attention. Lenny Leonard even make sure you know that's a reference to Do or Die in case you did not watch that match from 4 years earlier. And I love that it's all set up with Homicide trying to headbutt Joe one more time, which he's done in past matches, on the turnbuckle, and Joe no-selling it. And Homicide, immediately after he hits the headbutt and realizes Joe's going to no-sell it, he just says, "Why did I?" He doesn't say, "Why did I do that?" He just goes, "Why did I?" And Joe just grabs and hits him. I love that. To me, this is another match on the show I would call a super high, very good. To me, it's 3-on-3. It's another 3 3/4, bordering on 4. And maybe that's a case of me coming in a little bit higher than I should because I came in with low expectations based on my memory. But I will say, no matter what, this match is significantly better than I remember it being. And again, is it an absolute incredible, memorable classic? It's not even their best. No, it's not even their best match against each other. But they worked hard. And the way I would describe it is they did more on this night than they could have gotten away with doing, based on the fact that it being Joe's last match.
Yeah, I would say I probably wouldn't rate the match quite as highly as you do. But it definitely, you're right, was more than you typically get in these farewell matches. And I also think, like, whatever I thought was lacking in the match, like, doesn't matter. Like, I think it was better than it had any reason to be because the emotion could have carried it, but instead they went at a full, long, sometimes intense, sometimes lighthearted match. And I really appreciated that. Clearly Joe did not want to go out with just like a kind of going through the motions kind of match, and he didn't. It was better than the Battle of the Icons match, definitely. It's probably better than a couple of their other matches, like you said, not as good as their best matches. Just didn't have the intensity it couldn't. But I thought the tone was really cool. I liked, early on you thought it was kind of going to be the fun match because after Joe ran away through the crowd, after Homicide did the Tope con Hilo, he ran and got the beer, and Homicide said, "What the fuck are you doing?" And then said he wants a beer, but then he also said he wants weed, right? So I appreciated that. I like Jimmy Bauer coming in. We don't hear as much of his break-ins anymore. And of course he was totally sincere, but it was funny because the first time Jimmy Bauer came in on commentary, he was very sincere about calling Samoa Joe the Babe Ruth of ROH. He announced that Morishima had retained the ROH title. And I was like, oh, look, they actually did a Jimmy Bauer appearance without making a joke about him drinking during the show. But then, after Joe got the beer, Bauer came back on commentary to be like, that was my beer. And Leonard does make a Jimmy Bauer drinking joke. So I think, like, I spoke too soon is what I'm trying to say. But, yeah, I was really impressed that Joe did that finish with the top rope muscle buster because, like, first of all, go back and watch the one from Do or Die. This one was better. Like, this was a better muscle buster than the one in that match. Like, it was a really intense looking muscle buster. And the other thing was that Tope con Hilo during the Ole Ole kick, that was fucking awesome. Like, especially because, like, it was so late in the match after so many big kickouts that you thought, like, okay, Homicide is done hitting big spots. But then he hit that big spot and they went right into the finish. Like, that could be a finish of, like, a top-tier match between those two guys. Like,
and one other thing I want to – go on. I was just going to say one other thing I want to add while you're really praising this is about what Joe did is reminder. We talked about this on the previous show, just a few days, like a little less than a week before this weekend of shows for Ring of Honor. Joe had gotten like hit in the head and concussed so badly in TNA that they like stretched out the taping to try and give him like recovery time so he could work another match. Like this is a guy working really hard after going on an overseas plane flight days after he like probably suffered a concussion.
Definitely. And did you notice that right after the match, after after Joe pinned Homicide and after the top rope muscle buster, you could see they gave a close-up shot. Joe looks down at Homicide, like kind of gets real close and says, I'm sorry, baby. To which Homicide responds, don't worry, baby, I'm alive. Go get your pop. Which I thought was really, really heartwarming.
Yeah, I thought that was really sweet. It was almost like I wonder we've been speculating that we think without knowing for sure that TNA limited who Joe could lose on this final thing. It was almost like Joe was almost saying like if I could have I would have lost to you here.
I think that could have been it. Also could have been like, oh, that last move was probably pretty fucking crazy. That could have been it too.
Yeah, but yeah, I agree. That was a really sweet, real thing, and also that's such a wrestling term, like just say, "Go get your pop," like go get your love, like that is such a wrestling thing, like recognizing someone's going to get this surreal experience that rarely happens in the life of, a crowd of nearly 1,300 people are going to like now praise you like a god. So go do it, buddy.
For sure. Yeah, but overall, I thought, yeah, good match, and the emotion elevates it a bit. I wouldn't necessarily say the match is much beyond good, but honestly, like it's like I said, better than a lot of these farewell matches are. So I have no complaints about the match quality.
So yeah, after the match, we have the sequence that we just talked about and that Matt described. Then the entire ROH roster that was flown over at least comes out and they stand at the entranceway. They don't go into the ring like they did at the Chicago show as Homicide quickly clears out and leaves Joe in the center of the ring. The crowd chants, "He's a legend" again, as well as "We will miss you." Joe grabs the mic and says, "God only knows he'll miss them too." And he thanks them. The crowd at this point then chants, "Please don't go." Joe says the great thing about Ring of Honor is though he may be gone, all those standing at the entranceway remain. That gets a big ROH chant. Joe says everyone was wondering what he'd say tonight and says that lovely Gabe Sapolsky, the creative Jesus that he is, which gets maybe the first Gabe chant I can ever remember happening in Ring of Honor up to this point, gave him some words to say. So Joe pretends to read a script that's written on his wrist tape. It starts off with him thanking the fans and then reading off an instruction to smile, like that Gabe was even scripting that. Joe continues reading the script to say his whole career was due to the creative genius of Gabe Sapolsky. Joe jokes that he'll read the rest later and then just goes on to his regular thing. Joe says 5 years ago, Ring of Honor came with a mission to present a pro wrestling alternative. We get a "This is Wrestling" chant at that. Joe says they called them crazy, that it'd never work, that they'd burn out within a few months. 5 years ago, they were in a very small recreational center in South Philly, and now Joe stands before a packed house, not quite packed, in Liverpool. Still a very good house. Joe says he will always love this promotion, and when all is said and done, they'll say Joe's legend started in ROH. Joe says his name is Samoa Joe. They called me the Samoan submission machine, which actually gets a few boos because people I think are just allergic to TNA at this point.
Yeah, and also I think he clearly knew that was going to get that reaction. He kind of
Joe
smirks
smiles immediately once he gets booed. So he knew it was coming. Yet another thing of Joe kind of shipping TNA, like just prompting them to.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like you could tell, he has much more affection for ROH even during this era.
And he says before they called him Samoan submission machine, they said he was pro wrestling. This is Ring of Honor. God bless you all, and thank you for everything. Joe gets on his knees and kisses the ROH logo in the middle of the ring, which is, as I always say, is the riskiest spot of any wrestling show that you could do.
Especially with all the bleeding and stuff. Yeah.
He goes outside, he hugs Homicide and smokes in the aisle. And also interesting tidbit, I don't want to say this as complete fact because the tone in Shane Hagedorn's voice didn't sound 100% sure, but he seemed fairly confident on the honorable mention episode covering the show that Smokes was here because Homicide insisted they bring Smokes for this show. So, that's a neat little thing there. So yeah, he hugs Homicide and Smokes in the aisleway before he hugs a bunch of the other roster roster members that are standing at the entrance, including Gabe Sapolsky, who may be the happiest I've ever seen Gabe Sapolsky in my life, to the point where I think a freeze frame of that has to be the picture for this episode, with like Joe with his arm around Gabe and Gabe just smiling ear to ear. Gabe famously a very stressed out, screamy guy at points, especially while his shows are running. You've rarely seen the man this at ease and happy.
Yeah, and also,
Joe
I mean, when Joe, the thing I kept looking at Joe when he would do these speeches on all these shows, I just like he just felt like a class act. You know what I mean? Like he just felt like just, I mean, a good strong presence to have as the face of your company. It's sad that really no one else ever let him really be that.
Yeah. Joe walks to the ring to get one more pop, starts high-fiving fans around the ring. Joe then gets back into the ring and bows to each side of the ring. The camera follows him backstage before cutting away. So I would say this final post-match thing, it was very good, but to me it was probably, of his 6 farewell speeches, it was probably the second least emotional, mostly due to the fact that he had, cut 6 of them at this point.
And also that it was in England, a place that he didn't probably feel that real connection to. He didn't look into the crowd and see all these familiar faces. I think that makes a difference. That's why.
And
sorry, go ahead.
Okay. No, I was going to say, you go on.
I was going to say, like, that's why Chicago, even though the speech wasn't that good, the emotion from the crowd was a lot stronger. Not that this wasn't emotional or good. I'm not criticizing it.
Yeah.
But you could tell the difference.
Yeah, in fact, he had cut this a goodbye promo in this same building in front of the same crowd, basically, probably the night before. So even that's going to do something to it. He doesn't have any personal ties to this market the way he did on so many of the other stops of the farewell tour. I will say I do think it's better than the Chicago speech, although his near breakdown to tears before that match in Chicago start is probably ironically, the most emotional moment of the entire farewell tour. The speech in Chicago, I think, is clearly the least special of the 6 speeches. But again, this was still good. It was him giving his props to Gabe in a very jokey way. And going to what you said, in a second, we'll talk about Joe's career, but in Ring of Honor. But I want to say, I think you had a great point, which is something I was thinking about in the days leading up to this podcast, which is when Punk left Ring of Honor. I think I said one of the things when we summed up Punk was that, Ring of Honor, the thing that Ring of Honor lost when Punk left more than anything, that the thing that they wouldn't ever, I think, completely replace is I don't think they ever had a guy that was as good at promos and angles and seeing like all the little details between the matches and like doing full programs and like the big picture stuff like that. And I think you really hit the nail on the head. The thing Ring of Honor loses that I don't think they ever get back when Joe leaves more than anything is they never get a guy, I think, that is as good of an ambassador to the company as Joe again. Like, no one ever speaks more like they can speak for the company, that they genuinely love it, that they simultaneously, like, were built by the company and built the company. Like, that has the authority to not feel like just someone that's just staying here for a few years. And, like, yeah, they might have some fondness for Ring of Honor, but they were always passing through, I think I might even heard this from an interview with Joe, but if not, I bet you he would probably say this, at least privately, that probably to this day, Ring of Honor, his run there holds a special place in his heart, And I don't think they ever get a guy, again, like you were saying, that can really speak for the company the way Joe does.
Yeah, like I said, just a great face of the company, class act in terms of how he presents himself, how he talks. Even now in AEW, he has to be like a character. And like ROH let Joe really just be Joe in a way that I never really got to see, except maybe when he was on like commentary in WWE, he sort of got to be himself a little bit more. But as a wrestler, he never just got to really be, I think, the peak Samoa Joe that we love really ever again. Not that he didn't have a great career, not that he doesn't continue to produce great things in wrestling, and I'm sure, he's not done yet either, so, he has more time too, but this version of Joe, we never totally got back, and, I don't think I would have necessarily predicted that. So in that sense, I lament it more in hindsight than I did at the time.
So we then get a very nice video package running over Joe's entire career, one of the better ROH video packages I think we've gotten, and it ends with just ROH putting a caption on the screen that says "Thank you, Joe." And I have to admit, I got a little emotional. I didn't tear up or anything, but I did get a little like verklempt. I was like, "Oh, that is very sweet," and it is like I think I mentioned on an earlier show. Like I am kind of melancholy about this because, well, I think we both agree it was time for Joe to leave ROH. If anything, he was kind of overdue for him to leave. Like he had, he had started holding back a bit, doing more B plus performances, which is completely fine and smart from his perspective where he was at this point in his career. But like he had kind of done everything he could in the company. So in a sense, it's good for the company, but I still feel sad that he's leaving. And I feel sad as someone doing the Rewatch podcast. Obviously, one of the fun things about doing Rewatch podcasts and things is you get to kind of relive favorite moments of your life or your favorite moments of your hobbies. And it's like, I got to relive Joe's run, which was one of my favorite parts of being a wrestling fan. And I don't know if I'm ever going to relive it again. So that was a little bit, in a weird way, like a layer, like a meta layer of emotionalness happening, rewatching this match. So normally when that ended the show, but normally when a significant wrestler ends their run in the period of ROH, we will be covering on through the years. We sum up their career, and while Joe technically might have one more match we review, I think this is the most appropriate time to do it. So what I would start by saying, Matt, is like this podcast started when you invited me on your great old podcast, List 'em and Learn, and we did an episode of our top 10 Ring of Honor wrestlers. And I don't remember our complete lists, but I believe I'm sure I have it written down like on a notepad file somewhere. But I had Joe at 1 and Danielson at 2, and you had Danielson at 1 and Joe at 2. And after rewatching Joe's entire Ring of Honor run, I will say I still think I have Joe at 1, but it's gotten even closer, and it was close before. I remember Joe had a period near the end where it felt like he had kind of done everything he could do in ROH and was giving more B plus performances than A performances. But on rewatch, I think I discovered that that period is longer than I remembered it being at the time. I think you could even argue that after Joe loses the title at Final Battle 2004, peak ROH Joe is done other than Joe versus Kobashi. Not that it doesn't have great matches and some great performances after that. We just saw 2 of them on the 5th year festival, right? Like I think the Morishima match and the Nigel matches were both great.
And I love the Davey Richards match too. So there you go.
Yeah, and there was some magic, but I just think there was some magic in Joe as champ. And I think, as Gabe has said, ROH wasn't designed for the wrestlers there to be there for years and years and years. Like he expected them, he would push them to the top, they'd have a run, they'd get noticed, and they'd leave. And Gabe want these guys famously to have a second world title run. He wanted them, to get their one run and then leave, and not want them to leave, but expected that they would. And it's kind of amazing. It's something that would never happen in today's wrestling for a guy of Joe's talent to have a nearly 4.5 year run in Ring of Honor, in a company the size of Ring of Honor. I think Gabe did a pretty good job of trying to keep Joe busy with things to do after the world title. He gave him the Pure title. He gave him a story where he chased the tag titles. He gave him the Danielson feud. He had a little bit of involvement in the CZW feud. I think Gabe was able to keep pushing Joe as a top star in the company because in terms of popularity, I think he was the top star in the company, so he kind of had to push him to a certain degree. But there were a couple points in the last couple of years where it felt like this was a guy spinning his wheels, and Gabe was just because he's a legend of the promotion, and Gabe is just having to keep finding justifications for him to be there, which I guess is every wrestler, but it was a little more naked here. So yeah, Joe is an example of a guy who I simultaneously am sad to see go, but also know it was time for him to go. Like I said before, if anything, a little overdue. And that's normal in wrestling, right? Like it's not normal in recent times. Although now with more competition, it's starting to become normal again. But for most of wrestling history, it was normal. It was rarer to spend your career in one promotion than it was for a lot of wrestlers to have your run in one territory, and then you went somewhere else where you were fresh and you did it again. And nearly half of a decade is a hell of a run, I think, by any metric. And he had done everything he could in ROH. And I think it's telling that by the 5th year festival, this Farewell Fest tour for Joe, there was almost no first time in ROH dream matches for Joe for the promotion that were left for the promotion to book. Like there was the Davey Richards one, And they did the Morishima one, but even the Morishima one is kind of cheating because Morishima hadn't been in the company until that match. So it was almost like a special match. But really, Joe had wrestled all the main players of this generation of ROH, and most of them multiple times. Danielson, Homicide, wrestled them to death. Aries multiple times. Daniels, I think, multiple times. Nigel a bunch of times. Roddy, I think, at least a couple of times. He had, there would be eventually guys coming in, but like he had kind of tapped this well dry. I still have Joe as number one on my all-time list of ROH wrestlers because, and I want to make clear, I define that as ROH careers of wrestlers, like not the overall careers of anyone that's ever wrestled in ROH, because like you said earlier, Joe's had a very nice career, but I would say obviously Danielson and Punk have had better overall careers if you count everywhere they've gone. They ended up being two of the biggest stars of their generation, and Joe, well, he got over and was at least somewhat pushed everywhere he went, usually to the world title in most places he went. He never got to that ultimate level of a couple of his top peers. But I still have Joe as number one over Danielson because of a bunch of reasons. I think Joe's mid 2003 through 2004 and going into 2005, if you count other promotions, is one of the best 1 to 2 year stretches of any wrestler's career that I ever got to see live as it happened. I do not think Joe is quite at the level of being a Wrestling Observer newsletter Hall of Famer by that very strict metric, but I think he's an Indie Hall of Famer, no doubt. A Ring of Honor Hall of Famer, no doubt. A TNA Hall of Famer, no doubt. Not quite the super elite of the entire history of pro wrestling Hall of Fame, no, but that's still a great career. I think that, but going to what you said, Matt, I think the tragedy and the strangeness of, you said it at the end there of, we never saw this Joe again. It presented this way, let to run free this well, working this hard like this, and you being surprised by that. And I think I was too. And I think that's the kind of tragedy of, if there is a tragedy to having a very nice career of making a living in this business over 20 years and being well thought of by pretty much everyone. I think that the 1 or 2 years I described of his peak that we saw, that's a Hall of Fame level year. Like if you string a few of those years together, I would be saying he should be in the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame. And the fact that at this early stage of his life and his career, that tap is now turned off. He has a lot of very good years, but we never have that level of Joe again. I think is a real, it's a bittersweet moment, and I'll go into more of like why I think Joe's a great wrestler, but that's my initial thoughts. I wanted to give it over to you about just like the legacy he's leaving in Ring of Honor and where I'd rank him.
Yeah, well, I don't think my rankings have, changed from what I said back in the day. But I mean, does it really, I mean, 1 and 1A, whatever. Like, yeah, obviously Joe is one of the all-timers. And, I didn't think of it the way that you put it, which is sort of like his real peak ended as soon as he lost the title at the end of 2004. But thinking about it, I can't really argue the point. He sort of was there as the background a little bit. Because they never put the title back on him, he never really got to have that real main event feud ever again, except his involvement in the CZW feud. I think his presence contributed so much, even if his matches weren't at the same level. Like, just him showing up at the 4th anniversary to go face to face with Chris Hero meant so much more than anyone else possibly could have meant, including Bryan Danielson, who was the champion at the time. So that played a big part in it. Things like that. He was more than just what he did in the ring. But what he did in the ring was so special and so spectacular. I mean, when you talk about the greatest ROH matches of all time, the ones people talk about the most to this day still in large part involve him, even though they all really took place in the very, very, very early stages of ROH's existence. That says something, right? I think part of why he was able to get over so much in TNA early was because a lot of the fans there knew his reputation in ROH. Obviously, he put on great matches in TNA, but the vibe had to carry with him too. As far as like why he was such a great wrestler, I mean, I think you're the sort of person that can articulate better than I can. I I think he combined a lot of things that no one else in American wrestling during this era really combines. The credibility, the believability, the stiffness with, I think, genuine technical skills, and high impact moves and a knowledge of putting matches together. I think, obviously his style in the ring combined a lot of Japanese influences, submission influences, um, modern indie, but I do think in terms of vibe, the best American wrestling analog that I could come up with is for the ROH version of Samoa Joe is honestly like Bret Hart. Just that credibility, that seriousness, that never cheapening what you do. I think that really made, I think, that's part of why people loved Samoa Joe so much. We were a generation that grew up with Bret Hart. And he's, again, the wrestling styles are very different, but I think the credibility that they both brought to an era which maybe wasn't always so credible, I think was what made them both special. I think that seeing Samoa Joe as the face of ROH in like 2003, 2004 made ROH seem cool because it's like you knew that WWE was never going to promote a guy like that. And then as I watch more Joe, I was like, WWE could promote a guy like this. But at the time, it was like, this is different. This feels serious. And sometimes we like serious, obviously wrestling should be fun and all that, but sometimes you want something serious. And Joe, while he had a great sense of humor, never let his matches and his promos and his angles and his position feel like a joke while he was in ROH. And I think he set a really great example in that respect.
Yeah, and I completely agree with everything you said. And I think Joe was just going into what I think made him special as a wrestler. I think he was just a unicorn of a talent. Like I talked about during the podcast where we covered the Morishima match recently. I think Joe, when I think of what's the thing that makes Joe special, if I could narrow it down to like one kind of big group of things, I think it's just that he threaded so many needles that were incredibly hard to do. Like he's very balanced in a good way where he wrestled strong enough as a dominant big man that he gained this aura of like being the ultimate badass in his promotion and his whole indie scene. But he also worked in such a way that he gave his opponents enough to not feel like they were squashed and to also to have the kind of competitive star rating grabbing matches ROH and indie companies wanted to sell DVDs at this point. He was able to come off as menacing, but he could also be calm and cool and, like you just said, even funny. He was agile for his size, but he didn't do the kind of spots or the amount of spots where he started to feel like he was just a wrestler who worked like a lot of other wrestlers who happened to be big. Like you always felt the danger and the strength and the size and the imposingness of Joe, but you also knew he was an athletic guy. But like one didn't negate the other. I feel like a lot of wrestlers, one negates the other when they do it. Like even he was able to keep his vibe as a killer, even doing high flying. Like even the elbow suicida is a great example of that. It's Joe doing a dive through the ropes, but he's not doing a flip. Although I know earlier he did do a big like tornado flip, but like eventually it was just his dive through the ropes was him coming at you with a fucking elbow to the face. Like in a way that kind of sums up Joe. He'll fly occasionally, but he'll be flying with a goddamn elbow. He'll be flying to hit you in the mouth. And Joe also, like I said before, I think he was the best representative the company ever had. He was elegant and kind of stately when he needed to be. Like when ROH had the Feinstein scandal, it was mostly Gabe doing the damage control media interviews. But Joe did have that long torch talk with Wade. I think Joe, even then early in his career, had credibility enough that him sticking with ROH and speaking out in defense of them carried some weight with some fans in a way that any other wrestler speaking out for the company at that point would have just been handwritten as, they just want more bookings. When Joe said he would have melted down the ROH World title into a golf club, like I feel like that carried some weight during a really tenuous time for the company, even though ironically, maybe without Joe's knowledge, Rob Feinstein still was technically involved with Ring of Honor at that time. But, and Joe also was the guy who more than anyone else feels like he built the company in the first 5 years. Like the guy most responsible for its success, in my opinion. Like Punk has a case, but he didn't stick around as long. Danielson obviously has a case as well, but until his world title run, Danielson was in and out of the company. Like he was more than a special guest star in Ring of Honor, but he was not the guy where you expect him for every single show, the heart and soul of the promotion. You know, he could leave for a while on a Japanese tour, or he could go off to the UK for a couple of months, where Joe was from pretty early on, like not from day one, but within the first year of Ring of Honor in 2002, he was there almost every single show, the heart and soul of the promotion. And that Samoa Joe world title run, I think is one of the best title runs of my lifetime. I think Joe and ROH are intertwined to a degree that almost no one else then other than someone, again, like maybe Punk is. Like Joe and ROH grew together, and I think I'll be interested to know if you disagree with this. I think you can honestly make the case that both these statements are true, that ROH would not be where it ended up, or maybe would not even have survived without Samoa Joe, and Joe's career would not have been as good as it ended up being without Ring of Honor. Like, there are a lot of great wrestlers in ROH apart from Joe. Maybe they could have survived without him, but that world title reign was huge for the company, especially during that year with all the Feinstein scandal stuff. I feel like it was a huge part in stabilizing the company. You know, Joe versus Punk 2 during that run set the record for most DVDs sold for Ring of Honor, and that was what the company was financially based around. And then the same wrestler, broke the record the year later with Joe versus Kobashi. So Joe was dollars and cents hugely important to the company. And on Joe's end, like, yes, Joe was already known from some indie performances and work in 0-1 as someone with talent. And yes, he would have been able to develop and show that talent without Ring of Honor. But I don't think there's another promotion that would have put Joe in the place ROH did. Like, I don't think there's another company that was as prominent as ROH in this era, with as much access to top workers as ROH had in this era, that would have pushed Joe as hard and really celebrate him and put a spotlight on him the way ROH did. And I think that's evidenced by the fact that I don't think, like what we were talking about earlier, I don't think Joe's ever been the center of a promotion's world like this ever again. Like, he's a guy who he's been world champion almost everywhere else, but it's almost like when Joe goes somewhere else, a lot of times in like AEW or TNA, it's like you can tell they don't earmark him for a world title immediately, but he's so good and consistent, he eventually gets his way there for a while. But even in that case, you know, the TNA, he only had one run. We talked about on the other show for 6 months. It's such a long tenure there. The AEW run, I don't blame AEW for this because Joe's in his mid 40s now. But even the AEW run, it was, you know, a transition run between MJF and Swerve. But I would say this, like, without Ring of Honor giving Joe so much buzz, who knows if TNA picks Joe up or even pushes him to the level of pushing him. Because I think you kind of touched on that a few minutes ago, which is I kind of don't even know, because I feel like Joe was a guy you kind of heard early where some people in TNA were skeptical of Joe initially, even when he came to TNA. But I feel like part of the reason he probably got hired was because the newsletters were trying to go crazy over his ROH work. It was like, fine, you know, for the X Division, another guy all you internet kids love. And so I feel like it was more than any wrestler a case of they grew together. You know, ROH made Joe and Joe made ROH. Like, do you think I'm crazy for going that far? Or
no, I mean, I not only you're not crazy. I mean, I think what you're saying is like everyone agrees with you. Like, I think this is. Okay, I think Joe would say the same thing. Like, I think it's pretty obviously true. I mean, people who wouldn't be what they were without ROH. I think there's a bunch of people like that. You know, Danielson being one of them. Obviously, I think you could even argue maybe even CM Punk. You know, who I think would be like the most natural star of the bunch because he's such a great personality and such great promos. You know, I mean, just would he have gotten in the door, you know, without ROH? I don't know. I mean, if ECW existed, I think ECW would have done pretty well with Joe. I think their style wasn't as conducive to Joe's strengths as ROH was, but maybe ECW would have pivoted to more of an ROH style as WWE, you know, became more and more of like, you know, relying on hardcore wrestling. And Punk 2 obviously would have done well in ECW, but without an ROH or like an ECW type promotion, yeah, I mean, it seems obvious that WWE wasn't good. I mean, even with ROH, WWE didn't give Joe a real chance, right? And yeah, even with ROH, WWE really didn't want to push Punk. They did because Heyman got in charge of one of their shows. So I think it's pretty obvious that there was a symbiotic relationship where Joe and ROH came along at the right time for each other, and they were what both of them needed, and they helped each other grow tremendously, and they helped each other's legacy definitively.
And it's nice because often you don't see that in wrestling where like you can make a case that both sides got a lot out of it. Like there was no loser, you know, a lot of times, you know, I'm sure wrestlers or promotions feel like at the end of a contract or a run, like they definitely got more than I did or more than I was worth or whatever, you know. Just a couple of things to end on this. I keep going back to that run Joe had for a couple of years. That, you know, wherever you want to define it, he had that mid 2003 through, depending on where you want to say, sometime in 2005 run, if you include like promotions outside of ROH.
I would actually include all the way back to his debut in ROH. From day one, he was having amazing performances. I don't even think you have to wait till he won the title.
Yeah, that low-key match and his debut match, that's one of the better debut matches in Ring of Honor history. Maybe the best. I mean, although I guess you would have to count every match on the first show, and then there was some
yeah, not counting the very first show, I would say yes.
Yeah. But like he had the Homicide match at Do or Die, the Jay Briscoe Cage match, the Joe Punk trilogy, the Kobashi match, the first Necro Butcher match, and the first triple threat match with Daniels and Styles and TNA. And he had all of those in a span of less than 2.5 years. Like, people know, if you've been listening to this show long enough, I'm Mr. High Floor, Low Ceiling as a match rater. I don't do a ton of 5-star match ratings, but I usually give most matches at least an average. I would give, of those matches I just listed, at least 4 of them, if not 5 of those matches, 5 stars. And I'm stingy with 5 stars. I would give Joe versus Punk 2 and 3, 5 stars each. I'd give Joe versus Kobashi 5 stars. I'd give the first Joe versus Necro match 5 stars. And I haven't rewatched it in a long time. I might even give Joe versus Styles versus Daniels on the first 3-way on 5 stars on rewatch. I don't know. I'd have to go back and rewatch it. But you know, to have that many 5-star matches in my eyes personally in 2.5 years, and those matches being so different from each other, yet Joe being consistent as a performer in the vibe and who he is, yet it's able to slot into like a crazy 3-way spot fest or a more old Japan-y, very psychology reference to past matches, heavy epics, the way the trilogy with Punk was, to just the ultimate badass versus badass 20-something minute Joe versus Kobashi dream match, to the insanity of a Necro Butcher versus Joe brawling all over the building, chairs, guardrails match. Like, I don't know if I've ever seen in my lifetime a wrestler go on that kind of run of that quality. And the thing I always reckon is, it's just such a neat trivia thing. Dave Meltzer, before Joe versus Punk 2, and this will be harder and harder for people to understand as we get talking to more young people as we get older, there was a period where Dave Meltzer did not give a U.S. match in any promotion in America 5 stars for 7 years. And the first
sounds made up, but yes, it's true.
He gave in 97 Shawn Michaels versus Undertaker Hell in a Cell 5 stars, and then he didn't give anything in the America 5 stars in 7 years. I'm not even saying he's wrong for doing that. There were some not great years for U.S. wrestling from a match quality standpoint.
I think he's wrong, but anyway, go on.
I mean, yeah, we could probably do a whole show where we try and pick out stuff, but like that, like matches that he could have put. But anyway, we could probably make that's the Matt. If we got an old wrestler to join us, that's basically every wrestling podcast. We could make millions, but like, think about how crazy it was. Not only did he get Dave to give 5 stars to a U.S. match for the first time in 7 years, this was during a time when like U.S. indie wrestling was still gaining like credibility. A lot of people still did not pay attention to it. And we have referenced so many times, if you listen to the show for a long time, how many times in those early days of ROH in the Observer was Dave always talking about like, yeah, this ROH match was good, but it wouldn't work in the U.S. I mean, in WWE. So think about how good that match had to be and how crazy it had to be to break all those barriers where like Dave broke the seal on 5 stars, and he was like, guess what, everybody, it's on a promotion that most of you might not even be paying attention to, you know. And that was huge for the company. Like Gabe apparently freaked out because he knew what that would mean for the company. And again, we're talking about Joe's importance. Like this was before Dave fell in love with PWG, before like the second wave of the US indie boom where it was more accessible with more like pay-per-views and things like that and streaming. It was insane. So I would just end my thing on Joe by saying, if there was an ROH Mount Rushmore, 4 faces to represent the company, I think Danielson has to be one of the faces. I think Joe has to be one of the faces. In recent years, I've come to start to think that I think the Briscoes have to share a face. I'm greedy. I would want them to share a face so I can have one more open spot. I would say the 4th spot, there's a ton of wrestlers that have arguments. I could make arguments for and against Punk, Homicide, Christopher Daniels, Low Key, the Young Bucks, Austin Aries. But to me, Joe is the name of all those names where, and I hate this kind of thinking. I try to rarely ever say this kind of thing. I hate this kind of absolutism, but I will say Joe is of the level where if I was saying who's on your ROH Mount Rushmore and you didn't say Joe, I almost wouldn't be able to take your opinion on the rest of them seriously.
You'd kill them. You'd end their lives if they did that.
I'd murder them. But no, it'd almost be a thing. I hate saying this, where I wouldn't take their opinion then seriously. Or you know what? I would be interested in what you would have to say, because you have to have if you've seen this era, a hell of a good reason not to put Joe on there. Because
honestly,
I kind of slam dunk.
I think you could make an ROH Mount Rushmore, which just is Joe's face 4 times. I think that would be a perfectly acceptable ROH Mount Rushmore. 4 Joes.
Handsome Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, the handsomest Mount Rushmore of all.
So, yeah, just incredible legacy. And obviously we're not doing, I know some, at least a couple people requested we do a full 6-hour tribute to Joe the way we did with Danielson. I don't think we'll ever be doing a 6-hour tribute again, because it's a lot of work. And I don't think we have the personal connection to anyone as much as Joe, but I mean, as much as Danielson, but if anyone came close, it'd probably be Joe. But like, I mean, obviously amazing wrestler, great career, and it's sad to see him go, but he had a great run. So now, Matt, we go to the final.
Sad to see him go, Trevor, but I love to watch him leave.
Oh yeah, baby got back. But we go to PW Insider for us as we start to sum up the show. We'll first go to PW Insider. They wrote at the time, Ring of Honor officials were ecstatic about the double shot in Liverpool, Great Britain. We've got a number of live reports from both nights, which featured the end of the company's run with Samoa Joe as a regular. When asked for comment, Gabe Sapolsky said, quote, "This weekend will always be very special to me and the entire company. The fans are so tremendous and really pushed the wrestlers to go beyond their limits. There were so many great and special matches and moments. It would take me all night to talk to them all." So before we say if we agree or not, who wins the Matt F. Trophy?
I mean, it's got to be Samoa Joe, right? I'm not going to have another chance to give it to him. He deserves it for being the quadruple face of ROH Mount Rushmore. And, you know, he put on a really good performance considering this was his last night. He didn't need to work that hard. So I think he deserves it on multiple levels. Farewell, Samoa Joe. It's been fun talking about you for all these years, through the years, but you got a parting gift of the Matt F. Trophy.
And what'd you think about the show as a whole, and I guess the whole 5th year festival, now that that's technically over? Even though there's 2 big shows coming up next, they're not technically part of the 5th year festival. So it's always fun when I ask you, like, what you think. Because sometimes our ratings are more iffy, so I'm like, maybe there will be some things where it's like, I mean, I know what you thought of the show before I ask you, but let's sum it up. What'd you think about this show?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, about the 5th year festival, I definitely could not live up to the Milestone series. I think we knew that going in. I'd still say it was a step up from the months before, other than Final Battle. Like, there was a big jump up. There were a few pretty great shows. Some just pretty good shows, you know, like the Dayton and the Philly and even the Chicago weren't spectacular, but New York was really great. I think the Liverpool show was really good. The first one, the one we reviewed last time. And then this, I mean, I think this is one of the best Ring of Honor shows of all time. Like, I think between the Briscoes match, the Joe farewell, the tag title match, I really loved the Falls Count Anywhere match. I enjoyed the opening comedy match. I thought that Rave and McGuinness had a great match. I think this is just like banger after banger, and with an incredible crowd heat and a significant moment in Joe's farewell. I think this is top tier Ring of Honor show.
Yeah, I completely agree. This was a fantastic show, one of the better ones we've ever seen on Through the Years. It has everything. Like, get Stefan here because this one really did have it all. It was except
An adult child being carried by a man.
babies being attacked, a brawl that never stops, fire extinguishers, just trying to think of the weird things I have on the show, a blade job that doesn't bleed. It was so many matches on the show I either said were great or right on the edge of being great, and just like so many of them, the bulk of the card. And more than that, the thing I always preach that I love, variety. You got a comedy match, you got a great bloody false count anywhere match, then you got like a different kind of gimmick match that's more the weapons based in the ring gimmick match. You had the historical significance of Joe's farewell. You had the great tag match was like a Dragon Gate style go tag match. You had the Briscoes match was like a different kind of throw everything but the kitchen sink kind of match. The women's match was fine, but it was nice to see the women at least on a big London show, like Seidel versus Pac. Like, I almost forgot about that. When I'm almost forgetting about a match that I would think that was like 3.5 stars, and that's a match where that's almost an afterthought on this show. I mean, that speaks to the quality, and like you said, great crowd on top of that. It is just, and yeah, like in some ways, as a series, was the Fifth Year Festival quite the milestone series? No, but the thing I will give a ton of credit to Gabe Sapolsky for is, when you think about this series, it's really 8 shows, not 6, because even though last year the WrestleMania weekend shows were counted as part of the milestone series, and this year they're not counted as part of the Fifth Year Festival series, but really those shows come immediately after the Fifth Year Festival. So really, when you look at it, Gabe has to book 8 shows under this pretense that they're all going to be bigger than normal shows. And I think with the exception of the Dayton show, he goes 7 for 8 on giving each show at least one thing that feels like big, significant. So for New York show, you get Joe versus Morishima, and you get the Aries Roddy breakup. Philly, you get the shocking world title chance where Morishima wins the world title. Dayton is the one exception, I would say. I would say like the biggest things on that show is Davey Joe, but I don't think that's quite on the level of everything else we're going to list off here. But still, hey, they didn't get nothing, but as is sometimes the case, Dayton kind of gets the short shrift there. Chicago gets the shocking tag title change and the blow off to the Jimmy Jacobs Colt Cabana feud, and one of the bloodier matches Ring of Honor ever had. And then we go to England, and the first night in Liverpool gets Nigel Joe, which while it's happened a bunch of times before, it feels big because it's Joe's second final match, and it's in Nigel's home country. And we get a shocking tag title change. Tonight we get Joe's final match, and then the next show we'll be covering, we get Roddy versus Jack Evans in the first time since Gen X split up, at least in Ring of Honor. And then on the next night we get a ton of shit. We get the Dragon Gate 6-man second time ever in Ring of Honor. We get the blow off to Whitmer versus Jacobs in a cage. We get Aries and Strong for the first time after they broke up. Like, the fact that Gabe was able to find enough big gear things to basically fill up 8 straight shows, I think is really impressive. I think he did a really masterful job of spreading it out. And
I've always been a big 2007 defender. I feel like I am so far vindicated, and I guess we'll have to keep going to see if I get vindicated overall.
And I think your vindication won't stop. But before we get to that preview, plugs. Through the Years at gmail.com, THROH for through. If you want to write us, at Trevor Dame on Twitter, at Mayor MGF on Twitter. On both cases, if you just plug that into the Blue Sky naming conventions, you'll find us there. Just search us there. And next time on the show, we will be covering the first of those WrestleMania shows, because this train ain't slowing down. We are going to go see All-Star Extravaganza 3 WrestleMania weekend with, like I said, the Dragon Gate guys come in. We get a rematch for the title house between the Briscoes and Doi and Shingo, where something horrible happens, but everyone makes it through. But horrifying stuff we'll have to talk about. I mean, this has been the year of horrifying concussions in Ring of Honor, and Jack versus Roddy. It's going to be another big. Chris Hero is back, It's going to be fun times. Jack Evans is back. So until then, until next time, have a good time. Have a great time.